I believe everything is in order, so I will call us to order for this board business meeting this evening and ask Mr. Giuffre for a roll call.
Mr. Daugherty.
Here.
Reverend Eilert.
Here.
Dr. Lorenz.
Here.
Dr. Schwetzenow.
Here.
And Mrs. Washburn.
Here. All present. We are, for those who are viewing us online, present as usual in the middle school library, media center, that's what we're calling it. And we do have quite an audience this evening. We're very glad you're here, so we welcome you. And I would ask that the first thing we need to do is to adopt our agenda. Is there a motion to do so?
So moved.
Mrs. Washburn moved.
Second.
So then I heard Dr. Swetchenow second. Are there any questions? It is the same agenda that was published on board docs. There are a couple of items that have been added. There's a couple of changes in the HR items, an additional show choir trip, and then there's an additional set of minutes, which I alerted the board to so that we are all up to date on minutes. But otherwise, it's the agenda that went live on Tuesday. Okay, any questions or comments? All right, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote?
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
Mr. Daugherty.
Yes.
Reverend Eilert.
Yes.
And Dr. Lorenz.
Yes, motion carried. First item is to approve the minutes for the November 15th board business meeting, and I will make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Swetchenow seconded. Any questions, corrections, changes in those minutes? Seeing none, let's vote on those. Mr. Giuffre?
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes.
And Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
Mr. Daugherty.
Yes.
Reverend Eilert.
Yes.
And Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carried. The next are the minutes for the December 10th work session meeting, and so I would ask for a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Dr. Swetchenow moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Hard to get
Yeah.
motions
Sorry.
this evening. Reverend Eilert seconded. Those minutes are of a work session, so they are less complete or less full than most of our business meetings, but it was recorded, and that recording is available and linked. Questions, comments, additions to those minutes? Seeing none, Mr. Giuffre, let's vote.
Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
Reverend Eilert.
Yes.
Mr. Daugherty.
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Motion carried. And finally, minutes from our January 10th meeting, and that was our organizational meeting. And I will move that we approve those minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
And any corrections to those? Those were the most recent that were added on. Seeing none, let's vote on those.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Mr. Daugherty.
Yes.
Reverend Eilert.
Yes.
And Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
Motion carried. Now I come to the part in the agenda where I officially welcome our guests. We are glad to have you and appreciate your attendance here with us at this meeting. And I would ask that you rise and join with us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. And then we come to our regular opening item, which is hearing of the public. I see familiar faces here. I maybe see a few new faces. The way our hearing of the public works is we allot a half an hour to hearing of the public. Each person has 3 minutes to speak. We ask that you give your name. I think our policy actually says give your address. And then if you're here on behalf of any particular group, please let us know. But otherwise, name and address, and then you will have 3 minutes to speak. I think Mr. Giuffre has names up there. Do you know how many you have?
I have 8.
8. Okay. If there is anyone who came in who didn't know the process, there's a sign-up sheet. And so we can still, I think within that half hour, with 3 minutes, we could take another 1 or 2 if you want to. Otherwise, we will start with the ones that we have.
Very well. Okay.
All right, thank
Um,
you.
First person I have is Paxton Mers. Take your time, you're fine. This is
All right.
kinda against you.
My name is Paxton Mers. I'm a freshman. I live on Broadway Street. But I'm here to talk about Loveland Show Choirs. So here's what Oh, it's not on. Okay, thanks. All right. My name is Paxton Mers. I'm a freshman here at Loveland High School, and I have come tonight primarily to talk about the music program, but specifically the extremely successful show choirs, which our school is home to. I've been doing show choir for about 4 years now, and it is even greater than I could have imagined. Ever since I was able to talk, I knew I was a performer. Naturally, when I heard of an opportunity to sing and dance in a group, I immediately went for it. Ever since I have joined, I have felt the impacts. Not only has show choir given me a place to do what I love, but it has also provided me with a community and a sense of purpose. Getting to wake up every morning and look forward to fifth bell, the bell we have show choir, keeps me coming to school every day. On days where I feel like I need a break or I need to stay home for whatever reason, I always think to myself, well, I can't miss show choir. This program, specifically our director, Mr. Miller, has created one of the most successful and motivated groups I have ever been a part of. He has pushed each and every one of us to be our best, and while doing that, he has taught us how to be better people. He has taught us the core values we first learned about in kindergarten: care, respect, and responsibility. He taught us how to be responsible and take charge of situations. He's shown that we can be responsible for our own greatness rather than waiting for it to appear. He has taught us respect and how to be mindful of others in the situations they're in. Finally, as well as this program has taught us care. Every time I walk into the show choir room at around 11:23 in the morning, I feel an ever-present sense of love. Never in my life have I experienced a place so supportive and so uplifting. We have created a family in Loveland Show Choirs. The amazing people I get to spend time with every day have become like a home to me. They have become a safe place in a world where we may feel like outsiders or like we are inferior to other people. We have created bonds that stretch far beyond the norms of society. This program has become one of the biggest centripetal forces our school has ever had the pleasure of witnessing. In no other place can you find athletes, show choir kids, band kids, theater kids, and everyone in between coming together as a unit for one purpose.
1 minute.
This family is made up of all different backgrounds where we are able to use this common interest of ours to unite into one. I love show choir. I love this family. The reason I'm sharing this with you today is to show the importance of the program and what it means to all of us. With this new levy coming to a vote within the year, certain programs are at risk of being cut if the levy fails. And though I know these choices are hard, I am urging you to keep show choirs safe and sound throughout this process. I urge you to not tear apart this family that we have built and keep this amazing program alive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paxton. If we had time, we'd ask you to sing and dance, but we don't have time.
He is a soloist this year, so we can handle it.
You could do that.
Thank you.
I'm going to apologize ahead of time because even though Steve's writing is better than mine, I believe it is Steve Gagliardi. Are you Italian?
I'm Italian.
I'm
Part
not.
Irish, too. Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Gallardi. I live at 1036 Hickory Ridge Drive, Loveland. I've been a citizen of Loveland for 41 years. My wife and I raised 2 daughters and have a bunch of grandchildren, so thank you for having me. What I'd like to address is what I believe is a potential vote on a new school tax levy. And when I heard about this, I was really taken aback in that less than 3 months after the citizens voted on this, after what I believe was a rigorous debate during the late summer and fall, and the levy was turned down, that this is potentially being brought up tonight at this meeting. I think that I'm trying to sort out my own mind what has happened in the last 3 months since the vote. You know, we've had Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's holiday. And I don't know what has changed, and I'm trying to understand in my own mind why this is being brought up again. I vote in most all the elections, and in some cases, my candidate or the vote or levy that I voted on doesn't work out the way I voted. I accept that my fellow citizens voted a different way. I live with that, and I move on. And I just ask that the school board carefully consider this decision this evening in light of the fact that we just voted on this in less than 3 months. And I think we all have a lot in our lives to take care of. We have a lot of inflation going on. For me personally, I'm trying to figure out how to get out of Kroger without spending $100. So,
I don't want you to rush.
so I just asked that.
Former Kroger guy, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. But anyway, I just asked that the board carefully consider this, seeing that we just voted on this less than 3 months ago. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve, for you and for anyone else who plans to speak about or concerning levies this evening, just let you know that there will be discussion later in the meeting. So just to let you know that there will be more discussion about that. Thank you.
Our third person is Tom Kemp Hank. Pronouncing it right, or?
You did.
Very good.
Good evening. My name is Tom Campake. I've lived in the district here for 27 years now. I make this appeal to you tonight to not put a levy on the May ballot. I repeat, please do not put a levy on the May ballot. This community is poised to explode. Someone is going to get hurt sooner or later, even though that is not the intention at all. This has become a very personal issue to both sides. And you will be responsible for that tragic event should it occur. So please, in front of you tonight, I left some data that shows that you cannot get this levy passed. You will have organized opposition to it, as you have accomplished nothing to address the reason for the last levy failure. If you think you only need to convert 230 no voters to yes voters, please think again. You are already at your top limit of yes voters. The number of yes voters have only increased 53% since 2011, while the number of no voters have increased 240%, 5.5 times. The community is now aware and listening to the organized opposition. The number of students is decreasing, and with it, the number of voting parents. Your support is diminishing, even though your verbal bubble is increasing.
1 minute.
Ohio statistics show a lower chance of passing new operating levies in spring, 28.6%, versus 44.3% for all other levies. That reduces to near zero when there is organized opposition, as you have witnessed with the last 3 failed levies. Spring levies are not an indication of community approval. Should it pass, it is an indication of desperation, win at all cost. Do not act in desperation by putting a levy on the ballot in May. Any support that you might have gained will be lost, and you will get organized opposition again in November. I have provided you with a path to levy passage. Okay, but it starts now, it starts here, and it starts with you. Read it, discuss it, and implement it. Give this community a chance. Give this school a chance. We can all win or we can all lose. It's your choice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie Hodge.
Hi, my name's Leslie Hodge. I've lived in Sims Township, Hamilton County for over 20 years. I want to start by thanking Garth Carlier. regarding help with the FTE anomalies. He was communicative, helpful, truthful, friendly, and humble. Garth, thank you. You get 5 stars in my book. In my previous speaking before the board, I mentioned that if you win a levy by 1 or 100 votes, it will be a Pyrrhic victory if it tears this community apart in the process. Afterwards, somebody asked me, what's a Pyrrhic victory? A Pyrrhic victory is a victory that inflicts such a devastating toll on the victor that it is tantamount to defeat. Such a victory negates any true sense of achievement or damages long-term progress. There has been much discussion of many issues, but I want to focus my comments on the one fundamental choice upon which every future decision depends. The choice that you, the board, and you, its members individually and as independent thinkers must make is what course to take in the future with regard to school funding. You can either change course and seek a solution that sincerely, intelligently, creatively, and fairly takes into account the concerns of the entire community, or you can continue to follow the approach that the only solution to be considered is to levy ever higher permanent taxes, with the hope that the opposition will get weary and fade away, or that you will manage to roust out enough yes votes to overcome it. If you choose the second alternative, opposition to your levy requests will only become more entrenched. You will likely win the vote sometimes, and you would likely lose the vote sometimes, but you will never solve the problem, and this community will not heal. Please understand this message. It's time to do things differently, and I thank you all. I know it's a tough decision.
Thank you.
Josh Hendrickson? Thank you. I'm so embarrassed.
My name's Josh Hendrickson. I live at 11644 Cosine Drive here in Loveland. Have been here many years. I was going to start with thanks for all your service. You have thankless jobs. You make hard decisions and everyone hates you for it. So thank you very much. You listen to so much unsolicited advice, and here's some more. This community is faced with a severe problem when it comes to our public schools. And it's not merely a financial problem. I believe at its heart, it's an educational problem. We have, without any argument, some of the very best schools in the state. We have some of the very best teachers in the state. We also have a looming financial crisis that puts it all at peril. We have amazing, wonderful schools with incredible teachers. We have failing schools. It may not seem possible to have both situations, but it is, and that's where we're at. A few loud voices have somehow convinced our community that the schools can just be fine on their own without support, that they'll just continue on being great without investment. We know that's not true. I know the idea of putting another levy on the ballot must make you wary. 3 failed bids, why try again? Because we can't afford not to. Because we can't afford not to pass a levy. Our teachers deserve all the support in the world. We're not investing enough in our schools. We're not investing enough in our educators. We don't need fewer teachers in bigger classrooms. We need more teachers in smaller classrooms. We need the full support of this community. And I believe it's here. I believe it is ready. The true voice of Loveland is ready to stand up behind you and pass this levy. The last one nearly passed. We've learned how to speak against the opposition that often misleads and sometimes has occasional good points. We can learn from those. But don't listen to moving goalposts and forever no's. Don't settle for a whittled down levy that doesn't solve the problems. Don't settle down for whittled down answers that doesn't solve the issues. We need more for our educators. We need more for our teachers. We need more for our children. They are our future. Our schools are an asset of Loveland. They're one of the best parts of Loveland. This levy can teach our children just how much importance we put on them and their education. Let's go for the moon. Our schools deserve it. So do our teachers. They're everything for us. This is why we call ourselves Loveland, because we love these things. Our children are the future of Loveland. Have a little faith in us as we've put faith in you. Stand with us. We will stand with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Marcia Newman. Get your power back.
But not enough time to type. so I have to read this chicken scratch. I'm Marcia Newman. I live in Loveland. You have my address on the paperwork. Looking at the cash summary report that's attached to this today's agenda, we are halfway through the current fiscal year and have spent just a little over $26 million from the general fund. Extrapolating that amount to June 30th, 23, which would be our whole fiscal year, it is 52 million, wouldn't it be nice, 52,000? $52,245,692. The January forecast, which looks like it was just updated, has expenditures budgeted for $55,578 million. That is a difference of $3,333,457 between our extrapolated spending so far, based on actual for 6 months, to what is budgeted. So I'd like to know, what is the $3,333,057 difference expected to be spent on in this last 6 months of this fiscal year? Also, it's nice to see that the current cash balance as of the end of December of this year is still over $14 million, $14,623,000, which is just $350,000 less than what we started our school year on July 1st. And this is right before our payday of property taxes next month. We know the importance of the accuracy of the 5-year forecast, as it can trigger statewide financial oversight. It is also the central vehicles to review for the district. I look forward to a revised, accurate 5-year forecast before any tax revenue initiatives can be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my. Aaron? How do you pronounce that last? Thank you.
I have to say
Before-
Aaron with the
Before we
very cool
continue,
shoes.
the gentleman with the light back there,
Yeah.
if you're, or lady, I'm sorry,
Lady.
could you film without the bright light there? Thank you. I'm going blind, all the way up here, I'm going blind, I can't see anything. Thank you for that. Sorry.
My name is Aaron Spute. I live at 872 Augusta Boulevard. I'm a junior at Loveland High School right now, and I've been asked by our student representatives to share a little bit about my perspective and experiences I've had at Loveland the past couple of years and thoughts about student participation in the levy and raising support for our schools. I've been involved in the band program a lot in the last 4 years and before, and unfortunately the numbers are dropping. It's half as big as it was 10 years ago, and a lot of cuts have been made. There's no more 5th grade instrumental music. We lost our jazz band teacher a couple years ago, lost a couple classes such as AP Music Theory. And with the last levy failure, I think it was the first time I heard a lot of general discussion in the building, in the classrooms, by my friends, by my teachers. It was the first time many students had heard much about any sort of potential consequences. Teachers themselves told us they worried their jobs might even be on the line, and everything was a little ambiguous to the general student body. After the levy failed, the number one talking point was, well, if the next levy fails, then things are going to happen. I've witnessed some of the effects already, and I've personally talked to and worked with students about the importance of knowing what's going on. I was asked what I think students can do to participate best. I think going forward, it's going to be important to know the ramifications of the potential results. I think more people have to understand the importance, the reality of the cuts that seemingly may have to take place. Although a future levy may not affect me as much as the students after me, I've been greatly impacted by the opportunities at the schools and hope we can maintain those as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie Schell?
Hi, I'm Katie Schell. I live at 312 Albright Drive. And I moved to Loveland about 3 years ago with my husband and now 3 kids, just 2 kids at the time. We moved to Loveland specifically because we wanted to be in the school district. And we loved the community. I did a lot of research all over Cincinnati, and I actually grew up in Cincinnati and thought a lot about it. And we wanted the community of Loveland. It is just an amazing place to be. And my daughter, since she started going to Loveland, she's in 3rd grade now, and she's just really flourished. And we are so happy with our decision to be here. We are so impressed by the school system and would really like to keep it strong. She got the amazing opportunity to be in the Wizard of Oz as a munchkin, and I was blown away. I went to, a prestigious private school growing up, and was just amazed that what could come out of a public school, that it was everything. And my daughter has been so excited to go to high school ever since. She wants to be Dorothy when she's older. My son came to every single rehearsal with us and every single play. And he's 5 at Pop Kids, and he wants to do it. And I have an 11-month-old as well. And it means so much to me that we can keep our school system strong and have the opportunities for my kids that the students have now. And so I hope that we can put the levy on the ballot. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all we have.
That's it. Thanks to everyone who spoke. And as I mentioned right at the very beginning, there's some business to take care of, but there is a portion of the meeting towards the end, after we have the regular treasurer report. We then have board resolutions where we will talk about next steps, talk about possibilities, talk about needs. So I just want to let you know, we'd love to have you stay. We also understand that we're not always exciting up here. So we will understand if you do need to leave for some reason, but we are very glad to have you here, glad to have your input, and we're very happy that you might be here to hear the conversation that we will have a little later in the meeting. Thank you. Now, this is, the next thing on the agenda is a little, I don't know, I feel like it's self-serving. Mr. Broadwater, do you have something to tell us? This is Board Member Recognition Month, and I don't know about the rest
I'd
of
like
you,
to
but
stay on this subject for a while.
I don't know. Sometimes board member recognition is good, sometimes it's not, so.
This is good. We're going to, if you're not aware, this month is Board Member Recognition Month. And I would just like to say on behalf of the staff, everybody involved with the city school district, I think everybody can see how difficult a job they have just by listening to everybody this evening and trying to aggregate the community feeling and yet keep our schools as an asset, right? I like that term. But to all of you, I say thank you. The amount of time, I don't think people understand the amount of time you donate to the schools, to the kids. And that's why we're here, for kids, to figure out what are the best ways to run the schools. And I want to say thank you to all of you. I think we've all been on the phone a lot lately because these are big decisions that affect a lot of people. And it's not something you have to do, but you choose to do. And I say thank you very much. We decided to go with what I think all of us enjoy, which is great letters from our elementary students. So I want to thank Mrs. Foran, our principal at the elementary, for having those students write some great letters. Anybody have one you want to share, or some spelling you would like to share? Or
I do.
yeah,
I have one. I think this is great because it doesn't say much about me. It says, thank you, board members. I get a great feeling every day I come to school. And that's why we do what we do. So, you know, it says thank you, but it tells us that this child has a great day at school.
yeah, that one was for me, actually.
Oh, okay. And then we do have this, it got put on my desk.
Yes.
It says, Dear Dr. Lorenz, Mr. Eilert, Mr. Doherty, Mrs. Washburn, and Dr. Swetchenow, never forget the difference you make. And it was done by Cami Parrish, an LES aide. I'm not positive I'm going to share. I know that in kindergarten we learned to share, but this is really pretty cool. So maybe we'll pass it around a month at a time or something. It's just a really cool tiger. So.
I love getting these. One of the ones I got, it says, Dear board members, thank you for helping the school. We really, RILLY, appreciate you you, going to school is my favorite thing to do. I think it's just super sweet.
Well, and I'd like to pitch in one that I had mentioned to you guys earlier, but I don't know that other people heard. Dear board members, thank you for all you do. This school is so clean because of you.
We get our mops in our rooms, and when we're done the meeting here, we go out and clean, yeah.
I like this one. It says, "Dear board member, thank you for helping our school. You make it a better place for everyone. I hope you're having a good time."
You are, aren't you?
Yes. This one ends with, "Our school is the best. You are the best."
Got one, Kevin?
Catching up to you guys.
Oh.
Doing a spreadsheet or something. So there was one that caught my eye here.
You're trying to find it.
I'm trying to find it again because I tried to get through all of them before. Yeah, here it is here. It's pretty straightforward. Dear board members, thank you for all you do, and thank you for loving our schools.
Well, and you can see why I have the best job in the world, being able to hang out with kids like that, and that's what it's all about. So you should also have a certificate of appreciation, as well as a very valuable Loveland pen. I think I saw it on eBay for about $100. So, but we do want to give that
Maybe you'll
as
see
a.
5 more tomorrow.
But again, it's a very simple but heartfelt thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And another way, besides students supporting us, another way that folks do support us, whether you bring messages that are encouraging messages or messages that are critical, believe it or not, it really is a good feeling to have people here talking to us. It really is, you know, when we go through a time where nobody comes to our meetings, it's like we do our meetings and it's like, what are we doing up here? So it's good to have people here. So thank you for being here. We move on then to administrator reports. I will make the comment that we always do. Those are reports that get entered into board docs. They are what the board members use to prepare for the meeting, make the get the research done that they need for resolutions that come up in the meeting. So those are available for anyone to see on board docs. I would then move on to my board member report, which will be fairly short this evening because, again, we have a time for quite a bit of discussion towards the end of the meeting. So I will simply note a couple of meetings that will be coming up. There is a second town hall scheduled for Monday, the 23rd. It will be the same type of format as the first one that we had. It will be here in this room. There will be two board members present. Remind you that we do that so that it is not an official board meeting, but that there are board members here who can hear in person and can respond as they are able as individual board members. Superintendent and treasurer will also be here, and so you are all invited to that. It will be streamed and recorded as the other one was, so all board members will have the opportunity to see all of that input. This board has another meeting scheduled for January 31st. It should be a meeting very small in scope. It was scheduled for the event that the board decided to do something concerning a May levy. There are 2 meetings needed for that. This evening would be the meeting that would have the first resolutions to get some certification of what they might put on the ballot. And then the 31st would be the meeting where a decision would be made to put a levy on the ballot. I believe there will be one other item on that agenda. There are some courses that the board needs to approve, and I believe board members got information about those, but we weren't able to get them up onto the agenda for this evening. So we would like to get them under consideration and passed if they could, so students can begin to register for courses. I will just say, as a spoiler alert, they are not bells and whistles new courses. They are courses that will take care of some needs that we have, that will not require additional staff, that will not require additional resources. So they are filling some needs that we have been trying to fill at the middle school and the high school. Finally, I would remind board members, I know you just love to have me remind you about policy. Please make sure that you look at policy 0123. It's as easy as 123. That's the board member code of ethics, code of conduct. and that we will be considering in February, along with some other policies. We will have a presentation concerning policy consultants, so be prepared for February. I will finally report that the board has had, in general, some communication, but a fairly small amount. We had one email concerning an agenda question. We've had two emails that are definite levy no's, just referencing levies in general and saying no more levies. And then there was one email that came today referencing another email that perhaps came to the board, which I had not received, and I think other board members had not received. So trying to sort out at this point, there are a couple of emails that we've been receiving that haven't gone to all board members, and we're trying to make sure that all board members get the input that is supposed to be coming to us. So that's it for communication. Are there any other board members who have anything else to report at this juncture? Mr. Doherty.
Kathy, very quickly, I had a note from Tara Hamilton, who I think everyone will recall volunteered to head up the emergency fund with the foundation. And just a quick update that contributions have started to arrive. I would say it's modest at this point in time. That doesn't surprise anybody. We don't expect it to replace a levy, but it is a nice indication that the community is starting to become aware of the emergency fund that's available through the foundation. And Andrew here, remind me where on the website folks can find the foundation link? And then down 2 or 3, you'll find the foundation. So just to mention, and thank you to Tara and to those that have made contributions.
You might, I don't know if you want to explain it just a little bit further. We might have some new folks here who didn't hear the full explanation.
Right. Well, okay. So if you're unaware of it, we talked about this at the last meeting a couple of weeks ago. We started a 501c3. Well, we haven't started it. We've kind of created a conduit through the Loveland Foundation, which has been working for the benefit of the school for just over 20 years. Linda Slusha is the founder of that and continues to head it up. And she and Tara got together, decided that there was an opportunity here to give a tax-deductible venue for the community, if they so wished, to contribute monies to the foundation, which in turn would contribute it dollar for dollar to the schools for operating funds. This was in part inspired by a community member who, as I recall, the day after the levy loss, wrote us an email and said that family would like to take what their tax increase would have been in 2023 and pay it and donate it to the schools to help out. And again, we don't expect that likely everybody's going to do that, and it's not going to replace the levy, but anything that comes in can help preserve what we do and what we treasure here. So your support of that initiative will always be appreciated.
Thanks, Ken. Anything else? All right, then I think we move on to superintendent's updates.
Okay, thank you. First and foremost, I would remind everybody, like Dr. Lorenz says, there is a town hall Monday evening at 6 o'clock. For those of you that spoke this evening or anybody here this evening, I would welcome any conversation. It's a little bit more free flowing to where we can answer some questions that you have versus tonight. We just listen. I know Austin will be there Monday night, and we look forward to hearing from him as well. So with that, I want to first turn it over to Mr. Setters, who has some good news here.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Andrew Setters. I'm the Director of Communication for the district. I want to talk a little bit about the Feed the Kids Fund and some donations that have come in recently. If you don't know, the school year has been a little bit of an adjustment for our families over the last 2 years. through COVID relief funds, there's been universal free lunch for every school kid across the country. So as those funds expired, this year was a little bit of a challenge for people as they get back into the routine of paying for lunch. For families that are on free and reduced lunch, that means filling out paperwork that they have been out of practice filling out for the last couple years. We had a big education effort at the start of the year to get people involved with that, but still, we have families that struggle with that, and that's where our community has stepped up. For years, we've had a Feed the Kids Fund, and that's an opportunity for people to donate. The money that comes in at the end of the year, it's equally distributed to any family that has an outstanding cafeteria balance. And that's been going on for years, and we're trying to raise awareness about it again this year. And we want to recognize a couple people who've stepped up recently to donate to the Feed the Kids Fund. One of them is Don Trout. He's an active member of our community. He's been talking about this and kind of spearheading some efforts to bring in funds, helping raise more than $2,000 by spreading the word about it. And we also have a few people that we want to welcome up here tonight to have some recognition. Tasha Danzillo, the owner of the Works in downtown Loveland, and Heather Fry, who is the marketing director for the Works. They deserve our thanks because, as you can see, by the great big check they brought. They recently held a fundraiser and brought in $1,000 for the Feed the Kids Fund. So we want to say thank you.
And we would like to do more. So if you let us know the balances, we'd like to invite some of the other businesses in the city of Loveland to help us raise more money.
Excellent. So thank you very much for what you have done. Oh, the actual check. How about that? We will, Mike, who would you like to have come up and take a photo? We have Chris Tracy, who's our director of Child Nutrition. Something that goes to you. Yeah, well, you know, I figure you're, if anybody here is trustworthy with it, you are.
We'll see.
Thank you very much.
So we really appreciate that, and thank you very much for doing that. Anybody who's interested in learning more or donating can go to the website and find our food services page. Give Chris Tracy an email. She'd love to hear from you and help out more kids.
Well, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight, and thank you for the Works. Tasha is the general manager. We do have a new owner that took over in October, and we actually saw this on a Facebook post on one of the Loveland events pages.
I think that was probably Don Trout.
Yes,
so
it was.
he gets more thanks.
Immediately, he called and said, set this up. I said, okay. So we plan to do a couple more fundraisers. So the proceeds of some of the sales at the Works Brick Oven Restaurant will go to help feed the kids.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're not aware, there's a free and reduced program. The free program, obviously the students' lunches are paid for. The reduced, I think it's about 70 cents per lunch. And so that's what those funds would cover for those students that may not qualify, but there's still a need. The next individual, I'm going to let Dr. Puerta come up and discuss summer school.
Hello. So I just wanted to review what our plans are for summer school. Nothing new that we haven't done in the past, but wanted to just clarify the summer school offerings that we're going to have and what grade levels they're going to target. So the first one is Jumpstart that you've probably heard of before. This targets our current kindergartners and first graders. So over the summer, it'll be our rising first and second graders. And this is for students to help students who are currently off track. So based on our MAP scores in fall, winter, and spring, if they are currently off track for meeting that third grade reading guarantee and they're not quite meeting the benchmark, this is for them. And so we bring those students in small groups, 10 to 15 students at a time. And we have 5 teachers. It's the first 2 weeks of August, and it will be 5 groups of students in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. So it comes to about 100 students overall for the Jumpstart program. So it's just a very intensive 2 weeks in August, a full morning or a full afternoon for those students to help catch them up with the summer slide and make sure that they're entering their next grade level at least where they left it in the spring, if not a little bit further ahead. The second one is the summer book exchange, which is something that's been going on for several years. And this is for students in kindergarten through fourth grade. And this is that drive-through book exchange that students can come and get a new book each week just to prevent that summer slide from happening. And this targets all of our students who are in reading intervention in kindergarten through fourth grade and all students with special needs who have an IEP for reading. And so this serves up to about 400 students throughout the summer just to help prevent that summer slide and keep students reading throughout the summer so that they don't lose a lot of those words over the summer. And then the last one is high school. We're going to be offering summer school grades 9 through 12. We've got a few different opportunities here. Some are for original credit, and then some are going to be for credit recovery. So for the original credit, we're going to be offering in-person honors geometry, and this is for our students who want to advance their course offerings and get honors geometry out of the way over the summer so that they can advance into higher level math and science offerings the following school year. And so that's an in-person May through June, 4 hours a day. Then we're also offering original credit online for health and PE. And then we're going to be offering credit recovery online, but it's online on site. So students will be on Apex, but they actually need to come in and complete the course in person. And then once they're finished, they can be finished or they can take another class if they so choose. So we will have credit recovery for any students who need to recover any of the credits from this current school year. That's it. So any questions about summer school?
Questions on that? So this is quite different from what we were able to offer in summer school based on CARES funds or ESSER funds that we had received.
Correct.
This is going back to very similar to what we were able to do prior to that.
Exactly. We had to really assess where we were getting our biggest bang for our buck and be able to keep those programs with integrity. But we're not going to be able to continue offering all the things that we were whenever we had all the ESSER funds.
Questions or comments? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I understand you were not feeling well this week, so.
Correct.
Thank you for.
Courtesy of my daughter.
Thank you for being here.
So ends the update.
That's it?
That's it.
That's it for your updates?
Yes.
All right. Any questions or anything for the superintendent before we move on? Then we're going to move on to human resources employment recommendations. Mr. Caria, do you have a report for us? Would you, how about if we go ahead and make the motion to approve those resolutions and then we can have discussion?
So moved.
Reverend Eilert moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Mrs. Washburn seconded. So we'll see, you have those items on board docs and also the FTE count.
Yes.
For Mr. Collier, and I think he has a report for us, and then we can have questions. if
Yes,
you have them.
sure. I'm going to start with the typical HR section. A couple of things we want to, excuse me, bring your attention to. A1, we have a retirement of a longtime LECC preschool intervention specialist, Lynn Ori. She has put in for her retirement effective at the end of this school year. She is a wonderful person and a great teacher, so just wanted to make sure to bring that to your attention. She's going to be really, really missed. If you look on down a little further, you will see in section B for this Libby Westerman. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows this is not an additional FTE. Libby is somebody who has been substituting with us in a special needs classroom, and she has finished her degree. So basically, the FTE has always been there. She is just now moving from the substitute role, being in the room, to being the teacher, making sure that you understand that this isn't an additional FTE on the chart. In section C, we have a school
Or
site.
just to be, just help me be clear about that one. Where is she accounted for previously, or where was she accounted for previously?
That position has always been accounted for in the teacher section. She is an intervention specialist. And that FTE, it was never an FTE that we ever intended on it not being there. And so it was always in the count, even though we were filling it with a substitute at that time.
So it was part of the teacher count, and it will be part of the teacher count.
That's correct. Yeah, no change in that count.
Her personal status has changed.
That's correct. You got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. In section C, This is, it says employment of substitute exempt staff for the 22-23 school year. We have a school psychologist who's going to be going on maternity leave at the end of the school year. The person who is on the agenda for tonight, Miss Wiggett, she is somebody who used to be a school psychologist with us. She stepped away to raise her family. Anyway, long story short, finding a substitute school psychologist is kind of a difficult thing. We were lucky in that she was willing to work a couple of days for us. So this in no means is going to be a kind of like a day for day, but she's going to be able to work 2 days a week for us, filling in. And since she already knows, knows the staff and she knows the systems that we have, we're really glad to be able to bring her on. Again, that is teacher going on maternity leave. This is just a substitute, no change in FTE. And then I want to make sure that you guys understand that there was an addition. It would be in yellow in your copy you see at the very bottom. When I originally sent the information to you, this section I wasn't there. That's some COVID gap ESSER funds with some tutoring after school from the middle school. Just wanted to make sure that you, that it was noted that it was added late. So, questions for me?
The only question I have is just a reminder. We see a couple of bus driver things up in A, and just maybe a reminder of how we're doing with bus drivers. Are we still able to cover all of our bus routes?
Yeah, we're still in a, so to answer your question in kind of like a very short way, it is not good. But we are continuing to do things like have our transportation supervisor has to maybe run some routes. There are times where we have to double up some routes. So we are still under where we started the school year. You'll see on the FTE chart, we started with 43. You'll see then it's been at 38. We had some people who had to go on leave, medical leave. Some of those folks actually are back in between our last meeting. And you had asked me last week when this topic came up, and it isn't a one-for-one. We're actually in a little bit of a better spot. We're now back up to 39.25, I think it is. But we're still under that spot.
Quarter of a bus driver?
Yeah, they're not all full-time FTEs. Yes, sorry.
A small bus.
No, full bus, but I know what you mean. So you guys need to behave. So
He was up at 2:30 this morning working on stuff. Ask me how I know.
because you were up too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. So the bus driver situation is not good. We are still in need of any substitutes or anybody who is looking for a position to drive a bus. We would gladly have you come in and go through our process for us to hire you. So our FTE numbers from the beginning of the year are still under, but we are back up to an increase in that category with just folks who were already there. And especially in that category and our custodial category, I like to give you kind of like a real-time view of that. Because when we have folks out on leave, there are times where we don't have substitutes for those spots either. So just wanted to make sure to bring that to your attention.
And Garth, I just wanted to chip on how much of a problem it is for us. One of our issues has been with our projected busing and transportation budget. Some of that has been because of the increase in cost in fuel.
Mm-hmm.
But another part is the increase in cost of contracted services to transport children that we don't have enough bodies to transport.
That's correct. So something that Dr. Schwetzenau is bringing up for those of you who might not know, we in the past, so let's kind of like go pre-COVID, we have been able to have enough staffing to where there are some students that we were able to provide transportation where they are off-site. They're getting schooling someplace else. And we were able to hire our drivers to be able to take care of that. We're in a situation now to where we don't even have enough drivers for the kids that are coming here as we're trying to get enough folks for that. So we're having to contract out the services to get students that might not attend our campus. And that comes with a little bit of a cost and an additional cost because it's cheaper for us to hire our own drivers for that. But that's something that because of the lack of the numbers of drivers, that's something that's we've been wrestling with, and the number of those students and the cost is rising.
Which just goes back to the point that there's often parts of our budget that we do not have control over inflationary costs, and this is one of them.
Absolutely. Any other questions? I still have some other things to talk about, but not about this particular sheet. Any questions about what we've gone over so far? The next thing I would like to talk about, I don't know, do you want to vote on that first and then go to the next piece, or up to you? So how about I talk about the FTE chart first, and then we'll go to the other. Thank you. So something I want to make sure to let everybody know, for those of you who have either attended our meetings here in the past, or if you've watched them online, you know that something that's new for us is us posting our FTE count publicly so everybody can see. The FTE chart, it's kind of divided into different categories, and it has basically a head count, FTE meaning full-time equivalent. So it basically is a way for everybody to see checks and balances, so you guys know how many employees we have. It's not something that's listing individual people's names, but counts of those. Something that, and so for all of our meetings since October, they are being posted in the Human Resources section. Something I do want to bring up is that in the October and the November count, which is why I wanted to make sure to bring this up, I alerted the board. We had a change from an administrative position. It was an EMIS position, and it changed from an administrative role to an exempt role. Well, I accidentally made that change twice. I changed it on the August FTE chart, and then I did it again in the October. We, of course, noticed it, and so it's fixed now, but I wanted to make sure for those of you who are looking at that count to notice and realize there isn't any change in the staffing. It's just there was an error made, and I just wanted to make sure to bring it up and speak to the board about it.
So, Mike, what are you going to do about this?
Well, he's on
Me?
double secret probation. Luckily, this is the first mistake he made all year, right there.
So tomorrow I'm off? Is that right?
I'm making light of something here for a reason. I'm trying to bring more attention to it. When, I've read 500 emails over the course of the last 3 years almost that probably said something about trust and transparency. And there's been no change. Well, this is a very specific example. He didn't have to bring that forward. Nobody asked him to bring it forward. And not only did he do it, but he admitted making a mistake in a very public environment. That's not necessarily the way things were here X number of years ago. And I just want to point out, this is normal now. This is normal behavior. This is the way people feel. This is the way people think.
Wait a minute. My mistake, I'm not making all kinds of mistakes. That's so normal.
Well, we're also not telling you about all the mistakes.
No,
I'm joking.
I appreciate your kind words. What I will tell you is this. I take this seriously. So when I noticed the error, there was no way I was going to be standing up here and presenting and not calling it to someone's attention, because we're in a time where us having a very close look at our head count is super important. And I don't love the idea that we're talking about a mistake that I made, but I do just want you to know, if there is ever something like that, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm hoping that I'm never having this conversation with you again. But if for some reason there is
I'm
an
just
error.
going to emphasize the point that this is an example of cultural change within, the school system. This is an example of the kinds of behaviors that you see in high-performance organizations, where people deliver the bad news, get it out of the way, talk about it, figure out how not to do it again, and then move on. It's not that big a deal, but there is so much emotional and public pressure, so much focus on this organization. Over the last several years, people were, I don't know what's going to happen if I talk about this, right? So there's been change, and it's a statement of positive improvement. So thank you for doing what you're supposed to do.
All right.
Nothing more to be said.
Well,
Garth, you're off the hook, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, you're okay.
Mike's direction and the board's direction of making sure of the things that I have control over, making sure that it is transparent. I'm going to do that. So thanks for saying it. I apologize for the mistake. That's why I sent you the message earlier. and I will be glad for us to move on to the next section if you guys can
You'll
vote.
be glad if we just go ahead and vote on this resolution and move on to talk about
That would
show
be
choir
great.
trips.
I am
How's
open to talking about FTEs at any time. Anybody has any questions, send me a message, and I will be glad to set up a time and talk with you about it.
that? Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Any questions besides about mistakes? All right, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes,
Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
Thank you.
motion carried. Then we'll move on. Would you like us to go ahead and move on to the field trip
That would be great.
resolution? Got it. We need a motion to approve field trips for Loveland Show Choir to Twin Lakes High School for the Twin Lakes Invitational and Northrop High School for the Northrop Show Choir Contest.
So moved.
Mrs. Washburn moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Reverend Eilert seconded. And just, I assume maybe Mr. Carlier has a report on it, but this is a normal business item that we need to do. Show choir needs school board approval so that all of the
Yeah,
documents are in order for these
not all of
trips.
our show choir trips, but any trip, not just show choir, but any of our groups where our students are traveling out of state, we like to make sure to bring it to your attention and have you guys look through the information and to know what's going on and to approve those. There are two different ones here. Both are show choir and both happen to be to the state of Indiana. Both of the packets of information are in the administrator's content for you guys to see in board docs. And as we heard from a show choir student earlier, of course, they are a very successful program and they always represent us well in all of their traveling and all of their competitions.
Any questions or comments? All right, Mr. Giuffre, can we go?
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes,
Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
motion carried. That
Thank
do
you.
it for you, Mr. Carlier?
And Ms. Hodge, thank you for your kind words earlier. I appreciate it. Oh, thank you.
Before we move on to the treasurer's items, I just wanted to recognize our student reps who are here this evening. We didn't recognize them during School Board Recognition Month. We probably should have because they are a part of our school board, and we're glad to have you here. I understand you don't have reports for us this evening, but we're glad you're here. I'll let you know that we're moving into treasurer report and then into financial discussion, and we certainly understand if you still have some work you need to do tomorrow at any point when you need to leave, but we're also glad to have you here to hear the discussion of what's going on as well. So thanks. And we'll move into treasurer's items, and those items are, there are three different ones to vote on. Am I correct, Mr. Giuffre?
Correct.
And so do you have any report before, or shall we move into the items?
All I would say is that there is an investment presentation that's different than what we've had in the past, and it just shows the interest that's been earned through this fiscal year by this current, by month, November, December, and fiscal year to date. We're not a calendar year organization, so it's from July 1st and through now, so.
Okay, and those are available in the public content on board
Yes,
docs?
They are.
Which report are you referencing?
Investments.
Investment portfolios?
Mhm. Yes.
So it would be appropriate, I think, that we have a motion. Our first motion would be to accept the financial reports for November and December, which include those investment portfolio reports, among other things. Is there a motion?
Moved.
Reverend Eilert moved, and I will second that motion. Any questions for Mr. Giuffre? Again, those are the reports that we accept normally.
It's been a long time, but there's this thing called interest that's come back in play.
Rates have gone up a little, yes.
Long time.
It's nice while it lasts.
Right, exactly.
All right, so it's good news for this month, all right? So, all right, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Schwetzenow,
Yes.
and Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. The next item is a motion to approve the request of tax advances, and I will make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mrs. Washburn seconded. This is always a, I don't know if it's irony, it's just always an amusing item to me that we need to pass a resolution to ask for our tax money.
There's history.
I
Okay,
still think
forget
it's
about it.
amusing that we have to say, yes, we want our tax money. But anyway, so that's what this is, a motion for authorization for the treasurer to ask for our money. We don't personally have to go ask for the money. The treasurer has to go ask for the money. Questions or comments other than my amusement? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
Dr. Swetchner?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carried. We then have a donations item, and so I would ask for a motion to accept the donations listed under that report, under that resolution.
So moved.
Mr. Doherty moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Swetchnow seconded, and you see them listed there for a variety of donations this time. Any questions or comments? This is good news. Are we okay to vote?
Yeah.
Okay, then can we vote on that?
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Dr. Swetchnow?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Thank you.
And we'll have Mrs. Washburn out of the room for that.
Yes.
Motion carries. Okay, that is it for all of the regular work, and now we move into something called board resolutions. The first item under there is not a resolution. It is a report and a forecast update. So it's not asking for any approval. It's just a beginning of a report. And then I believe there will be board member reports and comments and discussion as well. But we'll start with Mr. Broadwater or Mr. Giuffre. Mr. Giuffre.
I just have a very, very brief component of this. Mr. Broadwater has the bulk of it, so when it comes up. Mr. Broadwater presented in December the changes that were going to be made to the forecast. 3 changes, basically, and they're all in expenditures. There is one, well, there are 2 changes to revenues. So, Adam, if we could scroll that up just a skosh. What you're looking at is the difference between the November forecast and the forecast as of 2023. And so those numbers that you see on that line item under property taxes, property tax allocation, unrestricted grants and aid, and restricted grants and aid are all relevant because those are updates to our forecast from assessed valuation changes in 2022. It impacts all of those line items. Those are immaterial changes, but those are how it rolls out into the forecast. And if you scroll down just there, well, actually, you can already see it, all other revenue there. That is more material than the other changes, and that is the Sims Township TIF. You see a couple $100,000 coming in 2023, and then you see the full impact coming in 2024 going forward, because it is a continuing impact to the district. This is revenue that the Sims Township had received on our behalf up until now. And so that is the projected revenue that the district will now receive as all other revenue. So if there's any questions from the board with regards to revenue.
I would just make one comment on the Sims TIF. Rob, you hesitated in the past putting in some of the previous forecasts because there were questions and uncertainties about it. And for purposes of the public, my last question got resolved yesterday or the day before yesterday on this. And, you know, for example, the question that was outstanding was whether this was a one-time or an annual ongoing stream of revenue, believe it or not. If it happened one time, it's good money, but it's not game-changing. Happening continually, now 15 years is what we finally settled on, I think, is a much more significant impact. And there was some question going back and forth between the entities as to what exactly this was. So, you know, it's here now, as I understand it, because all the questions have basically been resolved. There's just some mechanics involved in realizing the money on our books.
And it's important to realize that when exempted property, and that's what this would be considered, when exempted property comes back on our books, we want to make sure that it is the same as new construction, because we don't want the millage to be reduced, the 920 effect, House Bill 920 effect of not allowing the district to receive the additional revenues. So this is something that's been outstanding for decades with the township. And it's the property up there, Huntington Bank and the Costco, or not Costco, I'm sorry. It was Sam, yeah,
So this is commercial.
commercial property.
Property tax.
Last two.
That has been being collected. It was voted school district tax.
Yes.
But it was not coming to the school district.
Yes.
And now it is coming to the school district. So it's not a change to residential taxpayers, but it is tax money that boards of education have been fighting for years.
Yes.
And it's, to me, that's the good piece of it, that we are now seeing this tax money that was voted for the schools coming to the schools.
That's correct. Yes.
And Rob, I'm just going to throw out one more thing that you didn't talk about, that we talked about in the Finance Committee this week, which is the negative impact on budget on unrestricted state grants and aid. Do you mind just hitting that really fast?
Well, the reason that the unrestricted grants and aid are showing negative numbers is a result of reappraisal and also a result of another year of earnings tax, income tax, to the Department of Education. So when they calculate our revenue accordingly, we are a guaranteed district. And our base amount for our guaranteed district does not include certain categories. And so these are categories that are being impacted as a result of the increase in earnings and the increase in property tax values per student.
And so the responsible thing to do at this point is to assume that the state will continue to do what it said it's going to do, and we'll likely see $300,000 less in revenue in a few years, which is obviously a projection. That's why it's a projected budget.
I wish that they would give me a 5-year forecast before I have to make mine. It is what it is until it isn't. So.
Rob, school finance, for the layman here, when you use the term guaranteed, am I safe interpreting that for everybody here as there being a formula that the state uses to allocate state monies to various districts? If we went strictly by the formula, we would be getting less money than we already are, but we qualify for the so-called guaranteed nomenclature, and therefore we're protected for some period of time to that level of revenue. I don't know if I made it any simpler.
Oh, now it's clear.
You had mixed metaphors.
As simple as you can.
If we were a formula district, what you first said would be true. A formula district, we are not. The two legislators, Robert Cupp, who is a wonderful representative for schools, and Pattison, who's no longer in the legislature at all, spent a lot of time, 2 years, talking to school officials, board members, treasurers about financing schools. And in their work, they did not anticipate having, I believe it's 246 guaranteed districts out of 631. That problem actually is good for us. If it were 100, we might not be as guaranteed as we are, but because there's a third of the districts in the state of Ohio, actually a little more than that, that are guaranteed, we are more likely to maintain a level of guarantee. But at the same time, when they start taking that away, it could be 2, it could be 5%. But the idea and the purpose of the project that they endeavored to do, which was an incredible effort, did not result in a funding formula that works for all school districts in the state of Ohio.
I stopped to focus on this because state funding is a critical element to our overall funding and to our need for tax money. As an example, Eric and I were talking about another county that he has some knowledge of earlier, some profile similar to ours until you look at the tax bill and the residential tax bill, considerably less than it would be here. And then in turn, if you look at the state funding, it happens to be twice what we get per student. And that unfortunately is not unusual. We are kind of at the bottom of the list when it comes to the proportion of state funding that we get. And it is a major impact on the financial problems that we have here.
And so the thing that most folks understand the most, I've been doing this for quite a while, and what I've come to understand is the thing most people understand is, Adam, if you will scroll down, is expenditures, because they are the same expenditures or similar expenditures that we have. Don't tell me it didn't copy. Come on. Not there? I thought it was on that page. Sorry. Yeah, it should be. Let me send it again.
Just while we're waiting for that to come up, this, what you are showing us this evening is not the current approved 5-year forecast.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I have had some questions about this. Beautiful, thank you. So the forecast actually isn't required to be approved by the board, but it is required to be submitted to the state of Ohio twice a year.
Okay, so the forecast that was submitted to the state of Ohio was submitted in November.
Mm-hmm.
And there's somewhat of a, not a disconnect, but a forecast could change every day, depending on, any kinds of little things that happen, but it doesn't change every day. And so I'm just suggesting that we understand that this forecast is being adjusted for the purposes of discussion concerning the future finances of the district, not what was submitted to the state.
As well as the input that we've received since, and as well as what Mr. Broadwater presented back in December. And I will say there's an analogy that I heard a long time ago that made me not want to fly anymore, that you're off course 98% of the time. It is a navigational tool. And as we look at this, I'll get to the bottom line here, but what Mr. Broadwater presented last month was that we're going to take a few things off the table, a few things that were part of the presentation of November, one of which was 5 FTEs that occur over a 3-year period, and transportation to the high school, and those have a relationship between personal services and employee benefits and insurance. In the meantime, we have experienced a significant increase in purchase services, partly because we don't have the folks to do it ourselves. And so those purchase services include not just transportation, which was an item that was tabled last month, $180,000. But we've also had additional services for special education, student services that are in excess of a couple $100,000. And so and what I did, fundamentally what I did was I took what has been spent for 6 months and compared it to last year as I projected the next 6 months. And I think someone in the audience earlier said something about the numbers not, I can't remember exactly, I apologize.
The latter half of the year was significantly higher than the earlier half.
And as it should be, because we start school mid-August. most of the school year is in the first half of the calendar year. So obviously expenditures would be higher, whether it's for trash, for utilities, for whatever, because from January to June, we're in business. From June through December, we're only in business for 3.5 months. So that's why that is, and I'm sure that's probably not as obvious. Everything isn't expended equally. It's expended as you occur. So
Rob,
the
just
se-
to-
So you're talking about the first half. It's always hard with school finances. You talk about the first half of the school year versus the first half of the calendar year.
Yes.
And you're talking about January to June, not August to December or July to December as being a higher number. That's why the second half of the school year is higher, but it's actually the first half of the calendar year.
Correct. Yes. Makes
Did
sense.
I make that any clearer? Because I'm not sure.
Well,
I think-
I'll just go back and say that there are more educational days in the second half of the fiscal year. And therefore, we spend more money in the second half of the fiscal year.
You couldn't have said it any better. I
Thank
certainly
you.
See,
didn't.
we're getting there.
I'm going to learn someday.
Yeah. So to clarify a couple of things here, I'm pretty sure I understand these, but I want to make sure everybody else understands them. The line on here that we're looking at, purchased services, you talked about a thing called transportation, and then you talked about other types of services
Yes.
in there. And the transportation thing, I believe relates to things like we talked about in an earlier meeting with the transportation of homeless kids or special needs kids, et cetera, where we didn't have enough bus drivers to run those kinds of routes ourselves. So we had to hire that out to independent transportation companies that are a good deal more expensive than it would be if we were able to do it ourselves. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other part of this, the kind of specialized services are provided by our educational service centers. And as I recall, we have 2, right? That we use. Hamilton and Warren County Educational Service Centers, which are a significant provider of specialized talent, where we either don't have enough going on in a particular area to do it ourselves, or we can't get the talent ourselves to do it. So we ask the service center, we contract with the service center to provide that, and their costs have gone up. And that's the other part of this purchase services.
And what you just said, Kevin, I think is important to repeat, because it's not something that's easily absorbed. So if you need 0.2 of a full FTE, you use the Educational Service Center, because there's 4 other districts that will use their 0.2, whatever that is, whether it's supervision or some area of expertise, so that we're not affording someone at 100% when all we need is 20%. I think it's a really important point when it comes to the educational service centers, and as well as the fact that they are able to obtain talent that we may not be able to, because that talent might be utilized in one district one year, in one district another year. Our talent stays right here in Loveland, and so it's a very
And there's a
key.
markup.
There is, but it's we're still in charge of. That's why we used both Warren County and Hamilton County. We can use Claremont County if we need to, but I mean, we are able to shop around, and we do. We look at where we can find these services.
Yeah, we sat, Mr. Coles and myself and Garth, we sat down. We've since the Finance Committee, we wanted to dig into it a little bit more. And it's where, is it an advantage to have that FTE in-house or out-of-house? There aren't many full FTEs. Those are the ones you'd probably look at. But one thing that I think it's important to understand also is when you contract through Hamilton County, it's outside of the negotiated agreement. So for example, we have, I want to say it's a school psychologist who has about 17 years of experience. We're not paying what we would be paying per our contract, if that makes sense. So we're diving into it. We're looking at it, seeing, because Dr. Swetchnow had asked at a previous board meeting, how can we possibly look at that and have some savings? But to the point that was made, when you have point FTEs, it's difficult to manage, and it's a little bit easier to manage outside of a negotiated agreement. And so that's where the advantages come as well. And that's why you see probably every school district, Hamilton County and Warren, utilizing it simply for those special.
And Mike, I'll put you a little on the spot.
Sure.
I have a number in my head, but how much roughly annually do we spend with the ESCs?
Jesse. So you have Hamilton County and then you have Warren County, combined. It's about right there.
So it's a significant part of our budget.
It's a significant part of the purchase services that, quite frankly, all of those services, it's a legal obligation for the school district to provide. And that's where we are.
And so that's just what I was about to point out, which is that these are not services that we're choosing to purchase to provide an extra experience at our schools. These are services that we have to purchase from a legal standpoint. Can you comment, and I know the answer to this, and I'm afraid that everybody else probably knows the answer to this too. How has the cost of those services increased in the past year?
So it is annually, it's a 5% increase with the ESCs. It's 5% across the board. So if you're looking at, say, roughly $2 million, you're looking at 100,000. So 2.5 gives you what, 125. So that's not insignificant, right? But that is the cost of doing business, and that's when we say they're inflationary costs. That's an inflationary cost.
But the increase in those service center costs is not the only increased cost we see for special services that need to be provided legally. In other words, there are costs across the board that are additional costs as well.
Yeah, I would even go back to the transportation where if you have your own driver, you can control those costs. Where supply and demand is right now, you have transportation companies that have almost doubled their charges because they can't find drivers and they know we can't either. And so supply and demand, you've seen a large incremental increase on that, as well as an increase in the school district's obligation to transport kids. And that's what we're here for. But it is a large portion of the purchase services that increases. And I think it was Garth who mentioned, he's 100% correct. When we cannot transport ourselves, right, we cut high school busing and can't find some drivers, then it comes back to where we're going to have to contract out drivers instead of using our own.
So, last but not least, and Adam, I just sent you another email, sorry.
And sorry, Rob, can you, just to clarify that, and I think it's pretty obvious, the purchase services 2023 line item shows, as you described it before, a $568,000 increase over the previous year.
Yes, and I'm going to cover that in the next slide, but I wanted to hit operating transfers out just to show perspective of that number, because it looks like a huge increase, but if we go back just a few years, it's not. So I just wanted to remind folks of what we were experiencing before, and you'll recognize the slide once we get there. Adam, if you could put that last one back up. Yeah, the previous one. So one of the other concerns was the contingency fund. Not fund, it's just a budgetary line item. But that number was a concern. And I will just tell you, the reason that I put that number down there, and it isn't up above, is because all of the other items up above, if you look at them, they are exponentially increased by the percentages that are applied to them. The operating transfer out, which is where the contingency line item is not impacted. It is only in the current budgetary year. And I did not, I take full responsibility to not do a very good job of explaining this because I've never had to, honestly. It's just been something I've always had in my budget. It's a statutory allowable 3%, as Hodge knows. because she researched it, and it is something that helps us to be able to maintain that when there is a need, we move it from the transfer out up so that we have it there when we need it. So I took that out. And so what you see now is the same 20,000 per year that we've been taking out. And Adam, I'm ready for the next slide because I think purchase services is the one that is most interesting on where we are right now. And a lot of that has to do with inflation. But I want to just point out, if we look at 2019, thank you very much for my blind eyes, 5.784 in 2019 is what we were spending. So why did it drop? Well, there's a couple reasons. The predominant reason is because if anyone recalls when I was presenting the state foundation formula, $1.229 million disappeared from purchase services that was coming out of our funds in order to pay for scholarships out of district students. And that was part of the Cupp-Pattison model. They took that out because they heard from superintendents and treasurers and board members that it was really difficult to explain to our citizens why we were paying for tuition for students that didn't go to school in our district. And so it was a formula change. So if you, so coming forward, when that formula went into place, it's 2022. Now, you still have inflationary increases, you still have additional costs. And whether it be, this is not gas is in 500s, this is 400s. So this would be a different kind of gas. It would be, your utilities and purchase services from the ESCs and all of that. But you have two different things going on. You've got this huge $1.2 million reduction along with $555,000 reduction in revenues. We don't want to forget that. But that net amount, which shows to the bottom line, doesn't change the effect in this line item. So even though in this we're showing $5.4 million in 2023, at this point we're already $500,000 above last year. So that's what my contingency was for. Would be to move the money from the contingency into the 400s purchase services and to leave the salaries and benefits alone so that that trend could continue. But we have adjusted for the first 6 months. So I'm not adjusting for the second 6 months. I'm just taking into consideration we've got $500,000 more expenditures in 2023 from July to December. And I left the rest of it where it was so that when we adjust it, it will be adjusted from the ending balance and not from the contingency. That's how that works. So I just wanted to point that out because that's a big number. And the reason for it is because there's a lot of moving parts, but also because we had additional services that we had to afford through purchase services because we didn't have our own staff able to do it because we didn't have staff to do it, and because we also had more services that we had to provide for students that came into Loveland after for this school year. So I think there were 4 $20,000 expenditure requirements, and there was one $38,000 expenditure requirements. There may be more before the end of the year. Most likely there will be, but that's why the contingency was in place, and that's what I had intended for it to do. But with this, I just wanted to make sure that before Mike goes into his, and I'm sorry, I've spent way longer than I should explaining all this.
This one has been a hot button within the community.
Yes.
So again, I don't know if I'm going to help or hurt here, but my understanding.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Okay.
Was it not coming across? Okay. My understanding has been that the $1.5 million wasn't, just a fund that we could dip into if we had something neat come up.
Mm-hmm.
It was a just-in-case fund.
Mm.
I think the state actually calls it a just-in-case fund or something like that, but a rainy day fund, they actually call it. But it was there in case stuff happened.
Right.
Right. And if things happened while you had that, you would take money out of that line and offset an expense that you were incurring someplace else.
Right.
Now, all we've done is to eliminate the $1.5 million line item. No, it's not there anymore
Right.
going forward. But stuff is still likely to happen. And as stuff happens, you're just going to charge it where it would normally be charged. We'll show presumably a negative number there to whatever we had budgeted that line item to be by the end of the year, and so be it.
Right.
Right.
Yep. That's it. It really was just a budgetary compliance item. And honestly, I've said this before, I'll say it again, no one's ever asked about it. It's just
Right.
been part of my appropriations, and
So
so,
the risk to our forecast going forward is that the stuff happening isn't a line item anymore.
right.
So we've not projected any allowance for some of these unexpected things. And they might show up, and we just have to deal with them when they show up.
Correct. Yeah, that's it.
We haven't accounted for them.
Yep.
So, okay.
Well,
I don't know if- did I help?
Well, and two things. One, and going back to the importance of maintaining a cash balance, that's where that's coming from. It's coming from our cash balance.
Right.
And it's drawing it down faster than we had anticipated on the budget.
Instead of it being embedded into the forecast, it becomes part of the results.
And the second part, and I don't remember talking about this clearly, so I apologize. We talked about three main things in the previous levy that we likely would not be able to offer. We'd have to figure out how to offer going forwards. One was the additional staff. One was changing this contingency because there was confusion that I don't understand honestly. But the third one was about busing. And I don't remember that we talked about that in the two slides that you just showed us.
No, but I think Mike is going to.
Okay. All right.
And I'm sorry I stepped all over the time that you had. He's got a better presentation than mine. It's much more in-depth. I love working with a math teacher. Yeah.
Says no one ever. Are you finished, Rob?
I am.
Okay. What I want to do is the presentation I have to the Board of Education, I want to provide as much information. I gave it to you on your desk so that you don't have to squint a whole lot. If I'm going too slow or too fast, you'll let me know, ask questions during it. A lot of this information you've seen before hasn't really changed a whole lot, but we'll go over what we've got. So the next slide, with the previous current measures taken to decrease expenditures, somebody had pointed out that our cash balance was still at 14 million or whatever the number is. That's the goal, right? If we have increased deficit, then we need to work hard to try and maintain the cash reserve as much as possible. And what that means is we don't get to just do what we're doing. We either have to decrease expenditures or increase revenues. We don't get to just stay where we are without making difficult decisions. And I can tell you that the job that we do as educators is very important. It's so important you need to enjoy it, and you need to enjoy what you do. I do not enjoy levies. I don't enjoy that the way the state funding model is set up. I don't get to complain about it, but what it does to communities is difficult. So I appreciate everybody standing and being respectful, and I would appreciate you coming in Monday and talking and working through it and understanding that this is a community. It is a community issue, and it's not going to go away. We can stomp our feet and say we want it to go away. I would love for it to go away, but we have kids, and we have families, and we have a community to take care of. So with that, I want to go through some of the measures. Number one, significant number of staff positions have already been eliminated in the previous failure of a levy. I think it might have been in 2020, and I'm going to review those. High school transportation, to your question, Eric, is eliminated. We have taken it out of the 5-year forecast, just like we took the 5 FTEs out. We have taken out the contingency, and the TIF is worked in. So this has everything, I believe, on December 10th that we mentioned that we were going to do. And Rob and I have spent a lot of time together looking through the forecast, trying to be as fiscally conservative as possible. A forecast is just that. It's a forecast. And you try and be as accurate as possible, and you cross your fingers that state funding does not go down because we know it's not going to go up. Next, I have participation fees raised to the highest in Hamilton County. So when people say raise the participation fees for our student athletes and our students participating in show choir and so forth, we have the highest fees in the Hamilton County because of the previous failure, not the one in November. Hiring practice, my charge to Mr. Collier was I don't want to see FTE creep, and I even mentioned it, I think, my first or second day on the job at a discussion. That is where we spend money. That's where we spend money, our people. We want the best people in front of our kids. That's what we want. And I can tell you that walking through the high school the other day, one of the best programs we have in there, I got to see Miss Viox, who's doing a lot of great stuff with esports that we're able to offer because we've got grants and we're able to take care of it. I was able to stop into Tigers Inc. and see some awesome kids. I believe one sitting right here. And those are great programs because of the people, not because of the money you're spending. It's because of the people. And so we want to be as fiscally conservative as we can, but also have and maintain the level of excellence that we have. And I know people grow tired of me saying that we're only one of 12 districts that received a perfect on a report card. I get it. It's only one measure. It's a darn good measure. There are 607 districts in the state of Ohio. We're one of 12 because of kids like Mackenzie sitting here and what they get done. So we are going to maintain FTE counts. We are trying to be as open, as transparent as possible every month. We've promised the Board of Education that we're going to have the FTE chart out, and we have it. And we are going to look at it. We are not going to be able to add any FTEs without board approval, without the community knowing the direction that we're going. Contract for all staff this year, the teachers, our classified staff as OPSI administrators took a 0% increase on the base. And I always hear, well, yeah, it's the base, but teachers get steps and other people get steps. They do. Some don't, not 100%. The steps are in negotiated agreements and probably 99% of the educator contracts that are out there. But I do want to be clear that if there were steps and they were going to receive them, they did receive them. 0% on the increase base is a big deal for the associations to agree to.
Sorry, Mike,
yes,
I hate
go
to
ahead.
interrupt. I
Sure.
apologize because you're doing a great job and I'm just going to throw you off and make it worse.
All right.
But remember also, we extended the step schedule significantly.
Good point.
From 20 to 28 years with the help of the teachers, which also decreases the trajectory of future cost growth.
Good point. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No,
Because
no worries.
to be criticized on that isn't fair. That was actually a give from the teachers.
Yes. And if you don't know why the steps had to be stretched, the retirement system added years to teachers and therefore it stretches the number of years that educators have to teach, and the contract had to mimic that a little bit closer. Alternative funding sources, the tuition for full-day kindergarten. I put a video out before showing that for the most part, it's self-sufficient, and we're providing a great service for our kindergarten students along with it. Grants and business partnerships. We went through the strategic vision last year in hopes that we would get as much community participation as we could. Pay to participate, I've already reviewed. And so those are the previous and current measures. The largest measure we do is monitoring our FTEs. That is 86 to 90% of your budget is people, right? And that's 86 to 90% of what we do is having the best people in front of our kids. The next chart that I've got, Adam, I'll go through the first column that I'll have you look at to anybody here. Under January of 2023, you will see the different colors, teachers, 254.7, and these are the FTEs, which sounds very informal. It's full-time equivalent. That's people. Again, we don't have a 0.7 of a teacher. We just have a few periods a day for that teacher. But as you go down that colored column on January 2023, you can see the different categories. It's wide open to see what we're doing with teachers, administrators, nurses, counselors, whatever you want to know. We have 496.95 FTEs is the current FTE chart as of tonight, right, Garth? So that's where we are. If you look at May of 2020, which is the far right colored column, you'll see that we have 552.70 FTEs in May of 2020. So for a total to the right, the column all the way in the right, our difference, we are down 55.75 FTEs, and that is roughly 10% of your staff. And when people say, enrollment's down, so why do we have to worry about a levy? The enrollment is down, and we've been able to adjust because our FTEs are down. So it's really adjusted what we have. I've sent, I believe I gave the board, but I've got a chart that shows our class sizes. We are second or third highest in Hamilton County when it comes to class sizes. So when you look at the number of staff that are in our building, we are one of the slimmest staffs in Hamilton County is one way of looking at that. So what I want you to take a look at, I think there's three big categories there. The first one all the way up top, the difference in the teaching staff, we are at 15.45 less teachers. The transportation, high school transportation was cut, as well as we've had difficulty filling some transportation spots. That is down 33 FTEs. For administration, we are down 3, and I'm going to explain the teachers in the administration on the next slide. But I think it's important to remember that what we're really doing is trying to monitor FTE. I call it creep. You can't have FTEs creeping up, because again, that is where 86 to 90% of your budget is, and that's my responsibility to keep track of that. The one other column I want to note is the gray column. What we have done is separated those positions that are being funded through ESSER funds. ESSER funds run out at the end of 2024. We have 2.5 teachers there. Those are 2.5 reading instructors. And so when Dr. Puerta got up and discussed summer school and not using ESSER funds for summer school, we believe it's more important to have reading specialists in our buildings during the school year, working with our kids and improving their reading skills. We have 5 paraprofessionals that, for the most part, are in the special education classrooms trying to catch those kids up with the COVID gap, for a total of 7.5 FTEs paid through by ESSER. When the ESSER funds are done, we are going to do one of two things. Those positions go away, or if we have retirements or resignations and we're able to shift or reallocate an FTE and we believe the reading specialist is important, we would look at that. But we would not do it without letting the Board of Education know what our thoughts are. So again, I hope you can understand that FTEs in my book is where we are financially. That is our budget.
Before you
Yes,
move off
go ahead.
this, I know you want to move to the next slide, but
Sure.
2 points in this. One, I know there have been some questions in the community about the term reductions on this, pointing out that some of those reductions in earlier times were the result of resignations, retirements, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you can't claim it. Well, that's exactly what you're doing right now. You're making a conscious decision. You and or your predecessors made a conscious decision in earlier timeframes not to replace somebody and to let the total FTE count go down.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
All right. I just want to get that out there because I know there's been some concern about that element of, kind of this slide. The other point is you alluded to a little different piece of data, but you sent me something.
Yes.
I think I mentioned it in the last meeting, but again, maybe different audience. You have, well, actually the district, some of this is well before you as well. But as enrollment has reduced over time, and the slide that you sent me, I'll just give you the beginning and the end points.
Mm-hmm.
It goes all the way back to 2009. We had enrollment of 4,752 kids. And the 2022 enrollment on this slide is showing 4,284. So we've had a reduction in enrollment for whatever set of reasons, right? But the FTE count, and I think this is teachers, dropped from 230 at the beginning to just under 203 now. And the result of that is that the ratio of students per teacher has actually increased, which is, maybe not necessarily what you want to have happen, because it means that a teacher has a bigger class size on average in front of them.
Right.
but, you know, if you can look at this and say, you've managed over, I don't know, 17 years here to keep that relatively constant. As enrollment has gone up and generally gone down, you've managed the staff down. So when people say, your enrollment is down, to your earlier point, your enrollment is down, why aren't your expenses down? Well, you know, they are down. Proportionately, they are down.
Right.
That's been accounted for.
Yes. It's, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but to me, that's my biggest job, is making sure we're looking at FTEs and the appropriate part of educational leadership is making sure we're putting it in the appropriate places. So the next slide, I'll kind of explain what I mean by that. But the next slide, I wanted to get a little bit more granular to make it a little bit more understandable. The teaching positions that have been eliminated, and this is just a partial list, but I'm going to give you the list. The gifted teacher we've talked about at LES has not been replaced, so we are down a gifted teacher. The building coordinator at LECC was eliminated and was not replaced. Building coordinator is somebody in the LECC that is going to organize all of the special education. They're going to deal with students in terms of discipline. They're going to organize a lot in the building. It's kind of a pseudo administrative position, but also a teacher that takes care of kids. That has not been replaced and will not be. There were 3 positions at the high school, a math, an English, and a social studies teaching position that was eliminated that have not been replaced. There were 2.5 media center specialists, one that was at LPS LES. We had a 0.5 at LIS LMS and a full-time at LHS. And to clarify what a media center specialist, some of us might remember library like this. This is a media center. We do not, Loveland City School Districts does not have a certified educator in any of our media centers. And if you don't know that that's different, that's different. Most of your school districts are going to have a certified educator in the media center, and that's where you develop a lot of the reading skills as well. So 2.5 FTEs were eliminated. I'll give you an example that LPS and LES, that one campus, and LECC, which is a separate campus, the way we are keeping books on the shelf and maintaining, we have one paraprofessional who is works way above and beyond to keep all of those areas up so kids can go in there. And that's how our media centers run here in Loveland. We eliminated a music teacher. The one young man mentioned jazz. It was jazz, and I'm not the musician. I can't remember the music theory. Art teacher. We lost an art teaching position at the high school. It was not replaced. 2 instructional coaches at the district level, which was curriculum as well as technology. So if you look at all of the positions in the central office that are administrative, there are no coordinators. Everybody, special education, there's not a coordinator. It's Mr. Coles, who's the director, is taking care of all of our special ed needs in the district. It's something that I think makes us be able to make decisions quicker, but it also means it's very difficult to be visionary when you're working day to day. Those instructional coaches, the way I describe it to people who have been in business, that's your R&D. That's your R&D department right there. That's your research and development. And so we do not have that. 2 physical education teachers were eliminated. One was at the high school. One was at LPS and LES. I might have gone out of order there. But all told, that's 13.5 that have not returned, will not return unless the gifted teacher, I hear a lot from parents, it won't return unless there's a retirement or a resignation, and we feel that we have the ability to replace where we are right now without additional funds. We don't have that ability. We don't have that luxury to be able to do that. The administrative positions eliminated. I want to make sure we're clear on all that. The coordinator, I have just mentioned that, the coordinator of special education was eliminated and will not return. The assistant athletic director at the high school, you'll see most of the ECC conference has assistant athletic directors. We do not have one, and it will not return. The administrative positions reallocated. We used to have a director of technology and innovation. That was eliminated for a year. What we found in that year is There was no accountability for the software, for the millions of dollars of equipment that we have, and it was a hole that we had in regards to communication with parents, and really is something that affects the day-to-day operation of the district. So what we were able to do is take a retirement from the high school and not replace that position and hire the coordinator of technology and innovation at a lower salary. The EMIS position, to be clear with that, and Garth explained that, EMIS position is all the school data through the state of Ohio, used to be an administrative position. When we had the ability to move that out of the administrative realm and move it to an exempt, we did that this past year, which saves in salary and benefits. The chief information officer resigned, and that position was contracted through Hamilton County ESC, the service center. The contract that we had, we moved Mr. Setters to Director of Communication and Community Engagement. A, we were able to do it for virtually the same price, and B, Andrew gets to work 70 hours a week instead of just 40 now. So thank you, Andrew. But I'll stop there. Are there any questions? I'm trying to be as clear as possible with those positions.
I'll add this just because, and again, I know the answer and we've talked about it before. How do we stack up as a school district, both on class sizes, which you already mentioned once tonight, and administrator positions compared to the size of the student population?
Yeah, good question. So the class sizes, I want to say we have the third highest in Hamilton County. It's either the second or third highest. I can get that information, but it's high. And I sent a chart to Mr. Doherty. For the administrative, if you look at the administrative expenditures per pupil out of the 20-some districts, we are the second lowest. And so with all the financials, if somebody were to say, hey, Mike, can I come in and talk to you? I love talking about it because with all the financials, Loveland is not above average in financials. We are below average in our financials. When you talk about how we perform in the classroom, we were way above average, right? We're way above average. But when you talk about financials, we are below average in virtually every aspect, if not every aspect. But that's a long answer.
No, that was, and again, it's I bring it up only to highlight what we know to be true. When you're told cut your budget, you tighten your belt. What else have we been doing for the past 3 years? Certainly since I've been here and since you've been here, and we're now at the point of what do you want to do? Which kids do you want to hurt?
Right. And it's easy when you're not in these positions. When we have a young man talking about show choir, please don't cut show choir. For every young man like that, we've got many other youngsters saying, please don't cut X, right? And so there's no good decision in any of that. And it's very difficult. And that's why it's my responsibility to be fiscally conservative. All the numbers we'll look at, it is to maintain. And it's what we said last time. This time we got rid of the three talking points that people seem to stumble on: the contingency, high school transportation, and the 5 FTEs. They're out. We've added the TIF. And I think you're going to see what we said in November is still going to hold true, because inflation is inflation, and a need for revenue is a need for revenue. So
Mike, I can
yeah.
help you with a little data. The administrative expenditure per pupil, I'm not talking head count, but I'm talking about real dollars. We rank in the lowest 30% of all 600 districts.
Thank you.
And it's been relatively maintained over the last 3 years, where total expense per student has dropped from the, small number is good in this one, from the 60th to the 50th to the 40th percentile. So we are now in the lower half, comfortably in the lower half of all districts in total expenditure per student. And it's been coming down as we've all been working on this.
Thank you. And I hope the board understands, with a passage of a levy, that number of administrators is, the goal is not to change that. It's to continue doing what we're doing, maintain what we're doing, because we're doing a very good job with what we have. So the next slide, the next steps due to the failure of the November 22 levy: staff reductions via retirement and or resignations. Every day Garth and I speak, and we are looking at resignations, retirements. What does that look like? Right now, if there's a retirement or a resignation, I met with my building principals this morning, those are not being replaced. If there's a need, we're going to have higher class sizes. We just cannot have additional staff, and that's where we are right now. And we're going to take a look at it. The difficult part is teachers do not really have to let us know until later in the spring. So right now, we have a pretty good idea, but we'll know better as we get closer to the end of the school year. The cash balance will be utilized with an effort to preserve as much as possible. And that goes back to kind of the discussion that we had with, if you take away a contingency, that's fine. But if there's an emergency and we have to take it, then you're looking at the cash balance. And so now you're not keeping as many funds in your investments, you're keeping them fluid because you have to make sure that you're able to run the district. The contingency fund will be eliminated, which may impact cash balance. Let's hope it doesn't. The 5 FTE positions in high school busing is no longer included in the current forecast. There still is a need for additional revenue, just the way that this works. And a reminder that the TIF from Sims is in the forecast. It has been put into the forecast. So I want to go fairly quickly through this so the board has time to discuss. But this is based on the forecast that Mr. Giuffre and I worked through, again, with all the assumptions I just read. And the assumption here, the record button's kind of in the way, but this is based on a 4.2 mil levy. So if you looked at the agenda, Rob and I sat down. Our responsibility is to make recommendations to the Board of Education so they can make an educated decision. So if you look at Adam, if you highlight the one line I would look at is the revenue surplus or deficit, and that is the line that is in red. You'll see you have, right there, 1.936 is the deficit. If you take away or add the contingency to that, that puts you pretty close to where we were. So with the contingency coming out, it puts us at 1.9. The following year, you're at 1 million. The following year is 827,000. But what I would ask you to take a look at is the line below, and that is your cash balance. So you have 13 million to 12 million to 11 million. Now you're getting into single digits. So with the 4.2 mil levy, what you're looking at is 3 years, 3, possibly 4 if you look at the colored chart over there, and that's all based on state funding not changing. And so kind of what we said in November for the November levy, the lower the millage level, what happens to the time that you can use the finances, it's less, right? So the lower the millage, the less time you have unless you make the cuts in the expenditures.
Mike?
Yes.
I don't want to throw you off.
No.
But I was hoping that we'd see a no levy version of this. Do we have that we can share?
Do you have the forecast, Rob? I'll let you pull it up after I go through this.
I'd like everybody to see what happens to deficits and cash balances without a levy.
This is I believe it's the last slide of Mike's presentation, if I remember.
Yeah, without, well, that should be,
It's the May update.
right.
But
It's not that chart, if that's what you're looking at.
Correct.
Go through and then we'll catch
Okay,
up at the end.
okay. But yeah, that's a good point, just having a base. So the next, do you have, that was 4.2, where it would take us. 4.9, if we do a 4.9 in May, you can see that the revenue, again, the deficit is going to be the same because you're not getting your funds till later. 1.9 goes to 639 as a deficit, 135. Then you're at 1.6. If you look at the line below, the cash balance, it's holding on a little bit longer. So you have 13 million underneath the 1.9 deficit. You have 12 million, 12 million, 10 million. So with the 4.9, you're looking at, if we just maintain, don't increase any expenditures other than due to inflation or special education requirements, you're looking at being able to possibly getting it to 4 years, depending on how you work through it. And I hate to give years based on funding because it can change, but based on this model, that is the 4.9 mil levy.
Mike, again,
Sure.
this is just to help everybody understand
Sure.
these ending balances. there's a huge difference between the ending balance. I've been talking about this all year long. We keep talking about 14 million, and I keep calling it a pretty irrelevant number. What really is important is the low balance month of the year. And maybe Rob can help me on this, but as I look through the numbers, I think that the difference between the ending balance and the low balance of a year is typically about $5 million or so. Does that sound, okay. So with that in mind, when you see, let's see here, on this one, if you look at 2026, we have an ending balance at 10,573,000. That means that there's a month in the year that we are down to 5.5 million. And that is about roughly what we spend in a month. So if you think about what's really happening in the district at that point, you're at the beginning of the month, you're saying, you know, I've got 5 million in the bank and I got to write checks for 5 million. This is a really, really crazy tight month. And if something happens, I've got a huge problem on my hands. So that's you know, a floor that you don't really want to get to. And some of these, you know, even if you have in the next year in 2027, 6.9 million on hand, that means there's a month during the year that you got about 1 million and you've got 5 million in expenses staring you in the face. The following month, you'll breathe just a little bit easier, but it's going to be very nip and tuck.
And I just put a finer, again, for the folks out there in the public, the ending balance is significant in terms of the state thresholds we talked about last week.
Correct.
Last month.
Correct.
Those are significant in terms of understanding when the state would begin to intervene and so forth. But you're right, in terms of our own operational integrity.
Right, and we had that conversation with Dave the other night, and he, you know, I kept asking him, what happens in the real world when these ending balances aren't adequate enough to take you through various months of the year? And if you remember what he said, I understand, that's a real problem, but we're talking about ending balances for purposes of this legal definition.
Well, and he had also pointed out at that point in time that many, if not most districts choose to avoid that by keeping up to 25%
right.
As a cash balance of their budget.
Where we typically might be around 18 or so.
And so the question becomes, it seems like a nice target to say, well, just spend down your balance. But once you drop below $10 million, it starts to get sketchy
right.
if things don't go the way that you want.
Right.
So that was 4.9. And the next slide, if you look at 6.5, which was the third one that Mr. Giuffre and I had put on there, 6.5 mils. If you look at the first year, it's still the same because we haven't received any additional funding. So it's 1.9. You have now gotten out of deficit spending. The other two, you didn't get out of deficit spending. So now you're close. You got 192 and then 1,443,000 to the good. But the good news is if you look at the line below, your cash balance, you're holding on and you're able to extend it. So again, being the old math teacher, the equation's pretty easy. The lower the millage, the less you extend the time of the levy, unless you cut expenditures. And so looking at the chart, you can see it's kind of hard to see where the breaks are, but you got 1, 2, 3, 4. At the fourth, fifth year, now you're starting to look at, we may need some additional funding. And it goes to show you that I know school funding is no fun and levies are no fun, but until the state of Ohio, which is the only state in the nation that does it this way, until they work in an inflationary adjustment, this is what school districts have to do. The next slide, I just want to go back. The 4.2 mil scenario, the 4.9 mil scenario, and the 6.5. The 4.2 is the lowest one. You can see we have 1, 2 after 2 years. You're now looking at, we're going to have to do something. Maybe we can stretch it to 3. If you look at the next line is a 4.9 mil. You can see 1, 2 through third year getting a little iffy, and maybe stretching it another year. And then if you look at the orange line, the 6.5 mil levy, you can see that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, but then as you get closer to the end, it drops off. So Those are the three scenarios, excuse me, that we present to the board. And the next slide that you look at, I just want to remind people what we said back in November as we were discussing. This is the chart that we presented for November. The revenues, this was with a 4.9 mil levy. You can see that you had 78,000 to the good in 2022. You had a deficit there because we had to wait for the money of 1.2. You're now out of deficit spending. That year, the next year, you're pretty close at 312,000. But again, if you look at the ending balances, they look pretty good. So in November of 22, if you're successful, you're able to stretch 4.9 an additional 1 to 2 years. And that was the statement we made. The earlier that you do it, you get the funding quicker, you get out of deficit spending quicker, all the while monitoring expenses and maintaining what we're doing. And then the next slide is the chart we presented in June of 2022. Rob, I don't know if you're going to be able to pull up the regular forecast. This is what we presented in June of 2022. The bottom line was if we do nothing. Okay, so we were at 5% when you look at the revenue surplus, and we're still there. We still have a revenue problem. The orange line, I'm sorry, go up to the top one. The top one we presented was if we could get 4.9 mils November of 22, you could see we were able to extend it 1, 2, 3, 4, possibly 5. The orange is if we do 4.9 mils in May, we're already starting lower because we burned into our cash reserves, and that makes sense, right? You've burned into your cash reserves because you haven't got the additional revenue. So I present that just to show where we were in November. It shows that the earlier you get your revenue, the more you can extend it and the more you can forecast and project and try and control expenditures. So with that, Rob, I am done. I'll let you put up the forecast.
And Adam is having to adjust for my lack of preparedness. So I think
What I want to show on this, and the reason I'm asking you to put it up,
yes. Mhm.
is to demonstrate the problem with timing, the real problem that we're in right now. And, you know, we're having lots of discussions about, do we go in May? Do we wait for November? You know, what happens if it doesn't happen in November, et cetera. And I think this forecast will really help understand the picture.
And what it reminds me of is when I was much younger, and you know, you use the credit card because you don't have the cash at the bank, and this shows it very well because we're deficit spending, and that's what Mike has been advocating, is that deficit spending is the issue.
If I were to interject to the board, I know there have been a lot of discussions. The board members have had a lot of discussions with community members. I want to assure people, I'm not tone deaf to, I hear earned income tax. I hear income tax. I hear dual renewal. I hear permanent instead of continuing. I'm not tone deaf to any of this. This is my 36th year in education. I have never enjoyed a levy. I can tell you that because it's just very difficult. I would hope that you could trust in 36 years. I've seen a lot of things, and I've seen how school funding works. I don't like it, but the school funding is such that I love keeping the costs down because money doesn't mean education, people does. And us being able to monitor FTEs, that's our job. But at some point, you can't keep saying it's an expenditure problem when I've tried to list out as many cuts as we have, and I'm going to shut up since you have it. But just know that I hear people. I do, and I hope you hear me, and we work towards a solution.
And to segue with that, I know that that's up there, but to segue from that, just to be clear about where we are on the agenda and where we are in the presentation, these are, so far, we've had a presentation concerning the forecast and concerning some levy certification possibilities, recommendations from the administration. It's my understanding that board members have some additional presentation, some additional information, some additional things that they would like to share with the board to speak to just exactly what Mr. Broadwater was mentioning, that there is not an ignorance of other possibilities. And also because I see the seats beginning to filter out, to let you know that there is some more discussion or some more presentation that would like to happen.
Right, so. if
Now we'll
I-
go back to Mr. Giuffre and his,
He's,
his-
So just real briefly, what you're seeing here is that if we don't get something accomplished in 2023 regarding that ending balance, and you see that we will be, based upon Dave Thompson's presentation to us from the Auditor State's Office, we will be in precaution. But more importantly, it's up to us. We're looking at a projected deficit balance, not having enough money to pay our bills 2 years out. So that's what our current situation is. I think that is extraordinarily accurate. I don't think there's anything in there that's fluff. Obviously, we've taken everything out that anyone's had any questions about. So from that point, that is, Kevin, what you were talking about.
that shows the need.
right,
It shows
so
the need.
just, again, from a sensitivity to timing perspective, what this says is if we are unsuccessful with new revenue this year in 23, because we don't get it until 24,
Right.
right? We're going to have an ending balance of 9.8 next year. Take 5 million for the low month out of that, you're right on the cusp of having basically 1 month's of reserve going into a couple of times a year. Fail again in 24, and this gets incredibly ugly. Again, if we fail in 24, 25 is on the books. There's nothing we can do about 25 except cut, because it forecasts a balance of under 5 million in 25. So doing something, the gentleman was asking earlier, why do we keep coming back? Because the problem keeps coming back, and we have to find a different way to solve it, because it's not changing. So with that, can we kind of shift to the other part of the?
Right, and I was going to use that as an opportunity to make sure that we make a note in the minutes that, so that people can look at this in the future if they would like, I would like to go on to have a discussion of the different types of levies available to us. Why you in particular have made this recommendation is very clear, but I want everybody to know that all of us have considered every option very carefully. And even though we only get a chance to speak about it as a board in public, I know, for instance, Kevin has spent hours and hours understanding it. I've spent as much time as I have budgeted for myself to understand it.
2:30 this morning.
So I would like to make sure, I don't think that we need to necessarily amend the agenda, but with Rob's attention to the minutes and to making sure that this information is easily accessible to people, I'd like to proceed like that.
So that public content under under 7.1 would say something to the effect of the treasurer and superintendent presented the updated 5-year forecast and recommended levy scenarios for board approval. And
The board had a
the
robust
board
discussion.
had a discussion of that information and additional scenarios.
Sounds
Right,
good.
so we've been spending a lot of time responding to community feedback over the last month about different approaches to this. And I'm gonna have a couple of things to say here. I've got a ton of numbers, and I'm not going to take you through a ton of numbers. You don't want me to do that. But I will probably show you a couple of things. But I'm going to say a few things, and then Eric is going to take over and run you through a discussion of revenue options, the pluses, the minuses, the complications with them. And I think folks might learn some things that they didn't know before. So let me just start with a statement. I'll get this out of the way in 3 or 4 minutes. I know there's some of you that are not going to believe this, but I look at our jobs as representing the whole of the community. And I try really hard to listen to both those that are passionately supportive of our schools, as well as those that are passionately against new funding for them. And since our last meeting, as Eric alluded to, I have spent a ton of hours, both with people that do not support the last levy proposal, and many more hours doing the thing that I do often, which is researching, in this case, researching and quantifying the implications of different tax approaches. And this is where I think, we may have some perspective on the question that you haven't heard before, and I think you find some of it pretty interesting. I have come to realize that I can't convince people on a number of things. I've tried and I try and I try, and it just doesn't happen. One of them is something that's enormously clear to me, and I consider it an indisputable fact that the problem that we have is a broad-based tax burden problem and not a school spending problem. This gets portrayed constantly as a spending problem within the schools, and you might sense a little bit of defensive commentary from me as we go through things like this, because I've been in the middle of this thing. I kind of know what I'm doing. I've been in the middle of this for 3 years, and I understand how the district spends money, and I understand how it looks relative to other school districts across the state. Maybe I'm unsuccessful in convincing people of the nature of the problem being a tax problem versus a spending problem, because it's a relatively unexpected description of our challenge. I didn't start looking at this with that conclusion. I discovered that conclusion when all these numbers only added up one way. That's the only conclusion that you can arrive at the end when you study this thing. The schools have not added to that tax burden in almost a decade now, and have actually made do with available funding by adjusting headcount and expenditures to the times. And we've been talking a little bit about this, keeping the ratio of declining student population to teacher count effectively constant over time, for example. I said this earlier, we are now decisively in the lower half of all districts in the state in what we spend per student, all in, everything, all in. We are below average, comfortably below average out of 600 and something districts, about 60 districts below the average. We've dropped, and this doesn't get understood, doesn't get recognized actually. We've dropped our average teacher expense and have now moved down the rankings by about 20 districts, all in the last couple of years. So I would argue that there has been rational, measured, documentable progress to align what we spend to what the community can afford, all while delivering what is inarguably one of the best educational experiences for kids in the state. Doing both of these things at the same time is a heck of a juggling act, and it's happened. But at the same time, as represented in the new five-year financial forecast we've been talking about, with very modest projected expense increases, and I don't think we showed you the expenses there, but in the first year, I think you'd see something around 5.5%, and in the outgoing years, you'll see something in the neighborhood about 3.6% per year. And if you're in the business world and you're able to maintain, 3 to 4% expense growth year over year, you're doing a great job. That's fine. No problem with that. Shouldn't be a problem with that. The 5% you should take a look at and say what's going on there, and that's what we ask them to try to focus on. Part of that is the conversion of people out of ESSER funding to general funding, and some of it is the increases that we talked about. So one year that deserves a little bit of scrutiny. The other years, you look at it and you go, I mean, part of me actually goes, I'm not going to say it's too loud, is that enough? I think that actually looks pretty tight, but so be it. We want to be tight. So it's a financial forecast with very modest projected expense increases. The toll of a decade of cumulative unfunded inflation is causing expenses to outpace revenues by what you can now see, that last slide, by millions of dollars annually. And we can see that the cash reserves that had been built and maintained over the last decade or more, getting to that $14 million number wasn't easy. That's years and years of tax revenue and expenditures netting out reasonably favorably. Well, now we're burning that off. That cash balance is in decline and will reach the level where in some months going forward, there will not be enough cash on hand to pay monthly bills in some of these upcoming years. That's the point that I've been trying to make in the last several interchanges. As a board, we have to respond to the impending financial challenge. We all know we've got cash in the bank today. What we're trying to say, what we've been trying to say for months now, is that it's not going to last. It's going to go away. We can see that happening now. The equation has turned because of inflation. You either, in this case, have to decrease what you spend, and in our case, that quickly takes you to the number of people that we have caring for students or other services that families have depended on, or you have to increase revenue. Essentially, the first has been underway for several years, and I'm very concerned we'll have to deepen in the coming months, and if we don't find a revenue source, severely in the coming years. This will change, and this will look very different if we don't do something about this problem relatively soon. Effectively, you get to the point where you have to acknowledge, and I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with people, and you know, I hope the folks that disagree with me have walked away with at least a little broader understanding of some of the issues that we have. I know I've walked away. I've learned something by having these conversations. And the very fact that we're going to have part of the conversation that we're going to have here in a minute with respect to income tax and other types of taxes is directly related to some of those conversations. The crazy, and I do think it's crazy, I don't know what rocket scientists came up with this funding formula in Columbus, but to me, it's an embarrassment. This crazy school funding system we have in Ohio seems designed to ensure, to guarantee community strife. This is nuts. And I'll tell you, if nothing else comes out of all this, when we get past this funding issue, we have to come, one of the speakers made this point, and I 100% agree with it. We have to figure out a sustainable funding model going forward, because this is crazy, going through this kind of heartache every several years. It pits those that are, maybe the language is right or wrong here, but invested in a robust school system against others that may have limited, if any, direct link to the schools, but also may fund more than the school proponents. It's a reasonable problem. There's a lot of people that aren't connected to the schools that are paying a lot of the bill for the schools, and they have a right to be concerned. I get that. There is a gray, I believe, in between these two sides. And I think a critical challenge and a real risk to our community is in not finding consensus between these different viewpoints. If we don't, the damage that I firmly believe has started to our community reputation, unfortunately I hear it every day, will worsen. And not only will it affect our community reputation, it'll eventually affect our kids' launch into life, because we won't do a good job here. Explaining the complexity of just about anything that affects school funding, I have found is exhausting. And I have come to understand an unfortunately ineffective use of energy. I have tried and I have tried and I tried, and this thing is just too complicated to really get across to almost everybody. That's a theme, though, that will affect some of the decision-making I think that we're going to have to take this evening. How hard this thing is to explain to people. The fact is, the last election was what I consider the best survey of public opinion on the schools we've had in years and years and years. Back in 2019, the community convincingly shouted a deafening no to what was being asked for the schools. I mean, that was a pretty loud no. But this past November, an even greater proportion of the population, about a 55% turnout in 2019, about a 65% turnout in 22. And if you're into stats, 65% sampling, pretty good number, pretty good number. An even greater proportion of this larger turnout turned out to be just a fraction away from saying yes to a very different ask. What we went to the polls with this past November was a country mile away from what we did back in March of 2020, and half a planet away from what we did in November of 19. Hugely different. So I would argue that it was still a no, but statistically, it could have easily been a yes. And that tells me that times have changed, but the division in our community remains. I still believe we need to understand much better the reasons that the 52% of the community rejected the last one. Everything inside of me, this is my life's business training, everything inside of me says not knowing what was going on in the minds of the 52% is a problem. It presents a risk of us heading off in the wrong direction or failing, and I cannot see us fail again. But there doesn't seem to be a practical pathway to finding out the answer to that question. At the same time, everything I've studied, and I've studied numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers here. Everything I've studied also tells me we need to do something. We got to do something. The consequences of not addressing the revenue issue will turn into a problem of real impact to the community, I believe. So it seems to me that we have to consider different funding options in the context of three things. This is like the framework of how to think about this problem for me. Number one, what makes sense from a public policy perspective? Our primary responsibility is to ensure that there is an effective school system in place to help launch any child in this community whose parents want to send that child to us. Alongside of it, every tax strategy affects one group more than another. Money is money. Tax strategies just move it around. Who gets to pay it? Our challenge as a board is to find one that is proportionate, fair, and sensitive to the differing impacts on segments of our community, all to the extent that we can. There's limits to it. And, we talk to different people all the time, and everybody has a perspective. Everybody has a bias towards one type of tax versus another. And it's okay, Our job up here is to figure out the one that does the least amount of hurt to to most people. And it's not an easy problem to solve. Number two, and there's three. Number two, next.
You're at 12.
Next, you have to be practical and consider the salability of a given revenue strategy. What's right might not pass. So you must consider the difference between an idea with merit that may go nowhere versus something less perfect that might actually be acceptable to the community. So perfection's the enemy of good, that old saying, right? We got to be practical about it. And number three, finally, the limits placed on us by state law, both in terms of what we must do in the schools, and you heard half a dozen of those as we talked through earlier, and what we can do in terms of tax structures. I could dream up tax structures that might be a far more acceptable answer, but the legislature, in all their wisdom, our friends up in Columbus, give us a very limited menu of options. So we kind of have to choose one. So that brings us to our options. And Eric, if you're ready, I'd like to hand it back over to you.
Perfect. And I think as much as I appreciate your 3-minute preamble, But I'll kind of say, I want to bounce stuff back to you because I know that you've spent, again, in my mind, a ridiculous amount of time making sure that you understand the finances of some of these options. So we'll kind of go over these things together. Adam, do you have the presentation that I put up on the shared drive? It's the one with a nice orange background.
Dr. Swetchno, I think that you are at a minus
I know,
10
it's going to be
minutes
really
is
tough
where
for
you-
me. I'll talk fast. One of the things that I was
Numbers at you.
one of the things that I was always criticized upon was going through my presentations very quickly, and people say, "What just happened?" But maybe that's okay. So tax levy types and how do we make decisions? I think Kevin touched on that very well, almost to the point that, and I think we've been around each other too long. Can you hit the next slide for me? The decision-making challenges in this are very clear. And I think everybody can sit here and realize that they have a different perspective for different reasons than other people. And so as I go through the decision-making challenges that I identify in this process, I ask myself, what is the greater good? What is the least harm? What is the proportional burden? How do I understand varied viewpoints and honor those viewpoints? And then how do I develop consensus, both administrative consensus, school board consensus, and community consensus? So those are the challenges in the way that I see how are levies structured, how do school districts ask for money? And I think it's pretty clear to everybody after hearing the conversation tonight, school districts will always ask for money. Unless you have a 0% increase in your budget, which is impossible unless you're cutting staff, because you can't control inflationary costs otherwise, you will always come back and ask for money. The job is to do it in a way that is humble and in a way that is understandable and in a way that supports the students in the community. So going on to the next slide, it's actually more complicated than this, but I kind of kept it to the main types of levies that you'll see in the state of Ohio. And it's broken down into operating levies, which are considered to be fixed in term and can last for up to 10 years, I believe, in the state of Ohio, or continuing term, which will go on in perpetuity. Income tax levies are another primary way that schools can raise money in the state of Ohio, and those are broken down into earned income tax levies and traditional income tax levies. And I'll talk about it a little bit, but it's fairly obvious, I hope, what the difference between the two of those are. There's also other levy types that we're not talking about and haven't talked about since 2019, and one of those is a bond levy. There's also a permanent improvement levy. Hit the next slide for me. So I'm just going to kind of go briefly in order as to the way that I break down the advantages and disadvantages of each of these types of levies, with the realization that I could probably teach a college course on it at this point, which is much longer than anybody wants to stay. And going back to honor our community members, many of you could teach a college course on it now, which is probably something you didn't really want out of your life. But nonetheless is the way that the state of Ohio has set it up for us. A property tax based on a fixed term levy has several advantages. One of the advantages is a stable source of income, which allows for certainty in budgeting. You know exactly how much money you're going to get and when you're going to get it. This, though, clearly based on the title of the levy, is for a fixed time only. It will last for the period of time which the voters approved. This spreads the tax burden over all property owners. This includes owners of apartment buildings and rental housing. This allows the community to continue to vote on the acceptability of continued funding, meaning that when 3 years expires, the community gets to say, we don't want to pay that anymore, and we're going to have to do something else, as opposed to a continuing levy. The disadvantages on this is that it falls on the property owners in the district despite their income levels. And it's very clear to all of us that some people have more income and some people have less. Some people live in houses that are larger and some people live in houses that are smaller. Some people have fixed income and some people have variable income. Another disadvantage of this type of levy is that it completely ends after the fixed term. All income that has been coming in stops, although your costs have again increased over time. Hit the next slide for me. the way that I have seen this, and I'm going to try not to make it too complicated, and I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime. The largest danger in a fixed term levy is the sudden or severe loss of income with an inability to meet budget or costs. Fixed term levies must be renewed and new money must be added at the same pace as continuing levies, but with a much higher risk of adverse outcome because of the cessation of funds. So the overly simplified scenario that I drew out is a district that has a $50 million budget in the year 2020, a cost increase of 3% per year, leading to a $4.5 million increase in the budget by the 2023. So over 3 years, there was a $1.5 million increase per year. So the community passed a $4.5 million 4-year fixed term levy in 2020. The school year then says, we would like to renew this so that we can continue to control or continue to pay our costs, but it's no longer enough to pay costs because the budget by 2024 has increased to $56 million. So a renewal of that levy isn't enough to meet the costs that you have. So the district then instead asked for a $9 million fixed term levy of 4 more years. $4.5 million that you gave us for 4 years before, and $4.5 million more that we want for the next 4 years. The taxpayers say, no, that's a lot of money and we don't think that we can afford that or want to pay that. There's immediately, right that year, a $6 million hole in your budget. And a $6 million hole in a $54 million budget is not an easy one to plug without, again, catastrophic consequences. So that's my understanding of the largest danger of a fixed term levy. The school district, Franklin, which is not far from here, has run fixed term levies, and they just recently had a failure of an ask for 14.5 mils. They came back early, so they're not running out of money this year, but now they have an incredibly high stakes election or voting election the next year because, again, a 14.5 mil change in a budget is just something that you can't absorb. Let's go back to the property tax-based continuing levy. This is the next slide. The advantages of this are a stable source of income, which allows for certainty in budgeting. It spreads the tax burden over all property owners. This includes owners of apartment buildings. It is the most commonly used school funding mechanism because it's generally easy to explain and it offers certainty for budgeting. Disadvantages of a property tax-based continuing levy, similar to the ones that we saw in a fixed levy, it falls on property owners despite their income. It's assessed on current home value, but has no future increases to cover increased costs. It has been criticized as a forever tax. Once you vote for it, it doesn't go away. It is not thinking outside the box. There's other options available. Why do you keep asking for this option? Which leads us into a couple of other options. Can you hit the next slide again for me? Now I got to catch up on mine. I've got an earned income tax levy as the next one. The advantages of an earned income tax levy is that it protects fixed income taxpayers from tax increases. So for instance, the simplest example is a retiree who no longer has wage income. They're the ones who get squeezed very hard in this system that we have. So an earned income tax levy helps to protect fixed income taxpayers. It does not tax investment income or Social Security income. It has some inflationary protections built in as incomes rise over time, so do collections. The disadvantages of an earned income tax levy is that it is spread among the smallest number of taxpayers of these types of levies. It excludes corporations and businesses, so an earned income tax, and for that matter in Ohio, a traditional income tax levy, will put all of the burden on residents and not on businesses. It excludes apartment buildings if they're set up as corporations or S-corps, so you don't collect any tax from apartment buildings. It's regressive on lower income earners, as the highest 50% of earners will actually pay less on average with an earned income tax levy than with a property tax levy. And Kevin has some numbers to help to talk us through that. And then there's also a delay in collections. The delay actually will take 1.5 to 2 years to reach your fully assessed amount. So even if we voted for an earned income tax levy today, we would not start to see that until about 1.5 to 2 years from January of '24. We'll get portions of it between now and then, but it takes that long to get to the full collection rate. The last one I have, and I don't know if I've hit my 13-minute budget, is a traditional income tax levy. The advantages of a traditional income tax levy is that it is spread among most of the taxpayers, meaning that it does not protect people on fixed incomes. It has inflationary protection built in. It collects on average about 1/3 more for the same amount levied as an earned income tax, meaning that if I ask for a 0.25% earned income tax and a 0.25% traditional income tax, the traditional income tax will bring in significantly more funds. This protects the very lowest earning retirees because there is no tax on Social Security benefits. So a traditional income tax levy still will protect the people on the lowest end of the income scale. Disadvantages of this: retirees who have non-wage income, which is interest, dividend, capital gains, and more, still pay taxes. Investment income is taxed for all wage earners, which is unfavorable to those who have that type of income. And again, it is not paid on by corporations or businesses, so it falls on residents or individuals. So that, I hope, was a relatively short description of what I see as our 4 main options and the advantages and disadvantages of each. I just have a couple more slides. The last one, this one I put up as often as I can, and it's old numbers now because it's from 2021, but and the numbers have actually increased significantly in our favor since then. Loveland spends less money per pupil than the vast majority of other districts in the area, and we have better results as far as, I can't remember what this one was, Mike. It was the performance index score. So we have better results on the performance index score, and we spend less. I don't know what else wants to be asked of the administration and of the district than being able to provide that for our community. This will go on to the board doc, so it's visible to people. The next slide just talks about the timeline for receiving school district income tax payments. And the final slide is the Ohio Guide to School District Income Tax. If people haven't read that yet, it's fascinating.
Is that why you were awake at 2 o'clock?
I was like, I can't fall asleep if I read this. I will be at the community meeting on the 23rd, Mike? So if anybody wants to talk in more detail about these options, I am more than happy to. I don't know what else I can say other than the fact that while I've been here, I have seen nothing but people striving to provide great services for kids at low cost. And we've done everything that we've been asked to do by our community.
So,
Before,
Yep.
You have additional report, I was going to ask other board members if they had.
sure, it ties back into,
I wanted
Okay.
Kevin just to
Eric
kind of
stuff.
go back just to understand, because it gets very complicated. It seems easy on its face to say that an earned income tax makes sense because it helps to protect lower earning people, but it doesn't work out that way. Before we go into that, does anybody else have any questions? That's easy. You can't possibly have questions after that presentation.
So clear.
I could think of some. They don't have anything to do with the presentation. Okay, Kevin, it's been thrown back to you.
can I share screen now? Okay, so I'm hopefully just going to take a minute and take you through 3 different views of our community. And I don't know if you realize everything that this is a very different demographic than I thought it was until I started to research this data. This is property taxes on the left side. Those are segments of property tax values, ranging in the top one from less than 10,000 to the bottom category of 2 million or more. And this data is courtesy of a combination of census data and the State Department of Taxation, and kind of a merging of the two. And maybe 2 points to make on this. First, in the lower left-hand column, if you can read that, I don't know, but can I?
Didn't you hand out papers?
Yeah, but not for everybody out there. But I'll just tell you what.
I meant for board.
Yeah,
You have
so
it.
there, you have this, you have a hard copy. But I highlighted just the important things to talk about here. One is the fact that when we think about property taxes, there are about 7,500 homeowners paying property taxes. 7,500. Try to remember that number for when we go to income taxes, because that changes somewhat dramatically. The other thing is, how does the community break down? And that's what this other yellow line indicates here. That's the 50% of all households cutoff. So the first 50%, think of it as the lowest 50% of home values, generate, when we talk about property taxes, about 27% of all the property tax. So the flip of that is about 73% of the property tax is paid for by, if you will, the upper 50%. And generally, we're talking about homes that are over $300,000, right? What surprised me about this is the percentage of homeowners or households that are in the lower half. This is not an even distribution in any sense of the word. So again, remember 7,500. We go over to the income version of this. This is, again, courtesy of census data and the State Department of Taxation. So we're able to kind of merge them and update the census data and segment them. So on the left side, you'll see income brackets, and that starts at less than 10,000 and runs up to 200,000 or more. I'd love to have more segmentations, but this is what the census allows us. The lower left-hand corner, another highlighted field, 9,542 households. So let me recap that for you. 7,500 homeowners pay property taxes today. When we institute an income tax, 9,500 households pay income taxes. I can't tell you exactly the difference between the two, but I certainly suspect that there's a lot of renters in that 2,000 difference. And when I talked about the challenges before of explaining any of this to anybody, this one was in the back of my mind, trying to explain to 2,000 households who aren't visibly paying a property tax today that you're going to be asked to pay an income tax tomorrow is going to go over real well. And it's probably part of the reason that we're told, and I don't actually have the data on this one, I've just been told it by a bunch of people, that income tax levies typically fail 1 or 2 times before they succeed. And I should say that I'll speak for Eric and I think I can speak for Mike. I can't speak for the rest of the board, but we don't have a huge problem with an income tax. An income tax actually has lots of benefits associated with it. It is inflationary, meaning that as people's incomes go up, and in our community in 2022 versus 21, it went up 8.5%. That's a lot of inflation stuff, right? We would have gotten a heck of a tax inflow if we had an income tax in place in 2022. So in a sense, again, from a school district perspective, income taxes are not bad and evil things. They're just, on one hand, they're very hard to get to. And from a public policy perspective, they start to affect a lot of people and in different proportions than the property taxes do. And that's a concern. It's the lower income households who aren't paying taxes today that start to share the burden of these taxes going forward with an income tax. The second thing okay, so again here, let me just clarify that a little bit. I don't have a clear 50% cutoff on households here. 46 is pretty close. So the lowest 46% of our households generate 16% of the income and therefore would generate 16% of the taxes because this is a straight percentage on it, right? The amount of taxes that would be generated roughly would require a 0.25%, what's called traditional tax rate. So this is the non-earned income version of a school income tax, essentially all income accounted for. We would need 0.25% to generate roughly the equivalent of 4.7 mils. So pretty close to the 4.9 mils. 0.25% would generate $4.7 million. That's okay.
Okay. I would suggest, I don't know what the board has to say,
Right.
but I don't think this is the
But
appropriate
on the other
time.
hand, I'm going to be at the meeting if you feel like coming out, and
Let me-
I'll make sure that Kevin and I share all the data.
It's, okay, so in case nobody's, I don't want anybody to be confused about this. 0.25% income tax. This is courtesy of the Department of Taxation. 0.25% of a traditional income tax will generate $4.7 million. That's across all 9,500 taxpayers, okay? An earned income tax needs to be higher to generate the same amount of income because it's applied against a lower base. So in our community, this is kind of a stunning number. In our community, we have almost $1.9 billion of household income, almost $2 billion of household income. If you just look at household earned income, we have 1.4 billion. So if you need to generate that 4.7 million in tax revenue, you have a smaller base to apply a percentage across. So what you would actually need is something greater than 0.25%, and it works out to be about 0.34%. One of the twists with the tax, well, the law, not necessarily the tax code, is that you don't get to put in a 0.34%. You get to put in multiples of 0.25%. So a 0.25% would last about a year and a half, and we'd be back with another levy if we were doing this on an earned income basis. A 0.34, that would work economically, but it doesn't work legally. So you have to round it up to 0.5%. You have to do increments of quarters. And that generates, frankly, a lot more money than the district has been asking for, about $7 million, and I think would largely be unacceptable to the community. The other point here is that we talk about the earned income being harder on low-income families. And the reason for that is that, as a general rule, and I'll tell you exactly what it turns out to be, lower-income households have less of an investment portfolio, throwing off other non-taxable incomes. Higher-income households, kind of sensible, right, tend to have higher investment portfolios. So the way it ends up working is that the incremental burden on low-income households versus high-income households on an earned income tax ranges at the low end 14, almost 15%, at the high end 28%. So if you're on a high-income bracket, an earned income tax works way better for you than it does if you're a low-income household. And that is a challenge, right? That's a challenge for us when we think about this from a public policy perspective. And finally, if you just, I don't even know if I need to go through this, but this is just an attempt, and it's hard to do this, but it's to kind of compare the three, the traditional income tax, the earned income tax, and the property tax. These are side by side, and to try to make it a little digestible, because there's some apples and oranges in here, because when on one hand, we're talking about property values, on the other hand, we're talking about incomes. So how do you think about this? The way I ended up thinking about it was, and I simplified this as far as I can, is just to cut it in half. The upper half and the lower half of our households in both the income tax strategy and the property tax strategy, and how does that tend to work out? So what you see here on the income tax side, you've got that 9,500 households. The lower half on a traditional income tax would pay 16% of the burden. The upper half would pay 84% of the burden. If I go over to property taxes, where I only have 7,500 households, the lower half pays 27% of the tax burden, and the upper half pays 73% of the tax burden. So effectively what happens is, because we have more households, a property tax converted to an income tax ends up being less per household, but affecting more households than we ever did before. And therein is part of the challenge. So those are the numbers to kind of support Eric's different versions.
And I know that gets way into the weeds, which is not where we need to be. But it also makes it very clear it's not as simple as, well, if we just do an earned income tax, then that helps retirees, because there's another group of people that it ends up hurting. And that's kind of goes back to my second slide of what's the greater good, what's the lesser harm, and quite frankly, with the challenge of this job, it's a horrible job in that you can never make everybody happy because everybody has different needs and desires. And I still go back to the group of people that I want to make the most happy is our children, by giving them a vibrant, loving, which Loveland is incredible at, education. So that's what my main goal is.
And I would echo that it is to give the incredible education to those kids for the benefit of the whole community. In other words, I know that we're talking about people who have children in the schools, people who don't, but that's always the way public education has worked. We have responsibilities and rights as citizens to provide a public education. And yes, we're providing it for kids of certain people right now who have their kids in the school, but people have provided that tax money for all the kids that came before them, and we are working on a budget that's going to continue to provide for the kids that come forward, and the benefit of educating those children is for the entire community.
Sorry, go ahead, you finish.
I was just going to say that to explain the 30 years that I've served on the board, it's only going to take me, I would say, a half an hour or so.
All right, it's a deal.
And I would just reiterate what Dr. Swetchnow said, is that we do have an additional town hall coming up. Dr. Swetchnow will be there, I will be there. We'll try to follow the same format as the first one and provide some additional information. But I would simply mention that I really appreciate all this information that has been provided. I know that we are being asked that of our community, but I will mention that in the past years that I have been on the board, we have examined, researched, considered a variety of kinds of taxes as well. It's not new that this district considers the notion of an income tax. There have been, in fact, a couple of different committees set up to find out community beliefs and values and desires. And so, this information doesn't surprise me. The detail of it is much more than I've had at my fingertips over 30 years, but it is explaining what is happening in our community. I would also say that over the past 30 years, the burden has shifted even more to homeowners and even more to fixed income homeowners because of the increase in the value of our properties. I know my home is very much different than it was 30 years ago. And my income is very much different than it was 30 years ago. And so, if you extrapolate that, everyone has a changed situation. But the reason we're here tonight is I think we've proven that there's a need, that it hasn't gone away, even though we have tried a couple of different levies and we've failed them. The need hasn't gone away, that we're providing excellent education, and that we need to consider the best way to continue that provision of excellent education, both for the students in the school and for the community. If there's other comments on the sort of general nature of it, then we should have those. If not, we should resume where we are in the agenda.
Yeah, so
Mrs. Washburn.
I was just going to say, obviously, we've had a lot of conversations and presentations and information tonight about a potential levy and next steps for the district. Regardless of the outcome, I hope that people stay engaged, they listen, talk, ask questions, attend the community town halls. What I would say too is that this district does not have an expense problem. We've been excellent stewards of finances. We've not had a levy since 2014, and as you said, the need doesn't go away. So we need revenue. Everybody knows that, like Mr. Broadwater said. And Dr. Schwitzenow, we're always going to ask for money. Schools are always going to ask for money. We need revenue certainty because we want to achieve a quality education. And to piggyback on Dr. Lorenz, not just for our students, but for our community and for society as a whole. We have a fiscal obligation to look at the future and make decisions that are needed, whether popular or not, to make sure we ensure the best education within the means of our district. So I just think that everybody in the community, like I said, needs to ask questions, be open-minded, and have discussions.
I think one of the things to highlight from some of the comments that were made earlier and things we've seen in emails and so forth over the last several months, one of the questions is, what has changed since the last time we voted on this in November? And I think we've answered that to a certain degree when we look at where we are in terms of our cash balance without receiving additional revenue. And we've also talked about the cuts we've already made previously and that kind of precipice we sit upon where we will see, as Kevin said, diminishing results within the classroom if we don't increase revenue to maintain where we currently are in terms of what we're offering. I think there were a couple of really instructive things that were shared earlier. One of our students talked about the music program, and one of the eliminations that happened was to our 5th grade music program. We have half the kids now in the band program that we did previous to those cuts. And we see, a negative effect in that. We look at the services we're providing to our kids that are struggling with reading, and we've been able to provide for that with ESSER funds. Those are running out. How will we be able to continue to provide those interventions if we don't see increased revenue? Those are some of our most vulnerable kids to see success in the classroom long-term, to have those early interventions. And so I think we've well demonstrated the need for this, and I really thank the analysis. Thank the two of you for the analysis you've done along with the administration's analysis in helping us to see what our options are. And I think we have a pretty clear view of that, and we see a very clear view of where we are right now and the importance of doing something in the short term rather than the long term in order to maintain the quality of education here.
So I think we need to try to connect the dots here. We've talked about the pluses and the minuses. We've talked about the options in the last half an hour, whatever it's been. Maybe it's been 3 hours. I don't know. But prior to that, we talked about expenses and how we're controlling expenses. And, I'm not sure that, I think maybe half the community understands and agrees that we've been controlling expenses well. At least coming into tonight, I'd argue that some part of the other 50% would be more critical of us, that we haven't been controlling expenses. And I know at least what I was trying to do tonight was to highlight how you tell. Where do you go to look? What backs up the comment that we're well controlled? And the one-stop shop for me has become the state CUP report, which gives you the answer. It tells you how we rank in spending, and we rank really well. And we're getting better over the course of time. And, we've had criticisms about how much our teachers earn and all that kind of stuff. And we've worked hard with our teachers. Most of the community doesn't understand the conversations that have been going on there for the last 3 years, but we've worked very hard and collaboratively with our teachers to change the profile of our expenses in a thoughtful way, because these are gifted, impactful people. They've been here for a long time. There's been an understanding about how much they earn, and you can't change that overnight. And if you change it overnight and you change it too dramatically, you fall out of step with the surrounding districts and you become in a world of hurt. So you have to do it in a very thoughtful manner. And I think we've been trying to do that for the last couple of years. And again, some of the data in the CUP report documents the fact that improvements are in fact coming in that area. So the first dot for me is, are you controlling your expenses? And I would continue to argue, yes, we are, but that never stops. We've got to continue. We cannot lose sight that if a levy is ultimately approved here, that it's one of the hardest fought battles that we've had in this town in a real long time. And we better treasure any incremental revenue that we get and look over it very carefully for the long term. So we have to be committed to expense control from the long term. Then, if you are, and you buy into the fact that expenses are what they are at this point in time, and they're just modestly increasing going out into the future, you look at the zero levy forecast, we have a cash problem around the corner, and you have to deal with this. We could deal with it in May. We could deal with it in November. To me, the problem in dealing with it in November versus May is that if we fail in November, 24 is on the books, it's done. Our next shot is at 25. So it's so hard. I know I have folks in the community saying, don't do it now. Please don't do it now. I understand the entreaty, but the risk of failing in November, given the overall financial position, is a strong motivator to do it in May. And then the question becomes, what do you do in May, right? And we look at the 4 different options. And, I didn't know what I would find when we started doing the research on the data and running the numbers and all that. I didn't know. But what it tells you is that, an income tax could be a good thing for us. It's not necessarily a good thing for everybody in the community, so you have to personally reconcile whether you want to go there. And if you do want to go there, you have to deal with, do you have a chance of selling it, right? It's a little risky to go for an income tax when you really need the income from it, because the chances of failing are presumably much higher than any other approach. So strategically and maybe planfully, an income tax maybe ought to be on our long-term plan, but at a point in time where we have a little breathing room from some other kind of a tax, so we can afford to fail once or twice or however many times they typically fail. but it would get us out of some of this heartache, every several years of going through these things.
The paradox of an income tax has always been that if you need the money and you get a property tax, and then you immediately say, we begin to educate about an income tax, people say, we have just given you an increase in property tax, and we're not interested in giving you more money. I mean, almost the only way an income tax, in my mind, could ever work is if you were in a position where you were able to say, here we are financially, we are proposing an income tax, and there will be a rollback of some property tax millage at some point. And it's very, very hard for a district to get into that kind of position. It just is. So there's a real paradox about trying to work on an income tax. And that's always been the case. But
Okay, so nothing's easy, right? And all of this stuff is super hard. But if you're into the income tax world, I think that as you peel the onion back on this thing, the benefit of the earned income tax versus a traditional income tax fades. Because one of the ahas for everybody was that Social Security was protected in either model. It's excluded. It's not taxed. So if Social Security benefits were the reason to push you towards earned, no difference. Doesn't matter, right? And with the earned income tax, because of the way the law is set up, where you have to do it in multiples of 25%, you've got to go for kind of an enormous earned income tax, a lot more than we need, and probably even that much harder to sell. So I think, again, decision-making process here, you're pushed back to the traditional income tax if and when you think you could get one passed. When you really, really, really need the money, doesn't feel like the time to go for that. So that gets you pushed back to property taxes. Same old property taxes, right? There's a reason. We looked up the number the other day. Every one of the 607 districts has a property tax. A couple of hundred of them have income taxes in addition to property taxes. They're generally a combination, but everybody has property taxes. And I ended up feeling that income taxes were designed for a problem that we don't have. They're really designed for a problem that other districts have because of the rural nature of those districts. But maybe it could help us here at some point down the road. For the short term, it really seems like you're pushed towards the property tax, something that everybody understands, and we just have an argument about whether we're going to approve a property tax or not. The only question that you've then got to deal with is whether it is a continuing / permanent levy or it's the fixed term levy. Financially, in the short term, they're equal to us. At termination date, they could be dramatically different and dramatically impactful. Before the Franklin thing happened, I might have had a different viewpoint about this, but it seems like, Franklin tells me that voters were presented with an opportunity to put a bunch of cash back in their pocket, and they took it. And in a troubled economy, you worry that when that comes around again down the road, that you'll be faced with that real life problem. So I think you'll find that if a school district, Rob might have a better handle on this one, but if you have a choice between a fixed term and a continuing / permanent levy, a school district would be crazy to go for the fixed term. Everybody would love to go for the continuing, but for various reasons, some people have decided to do otherwise.
the other thing I would say about the fixed versus the continuing is, if you are showing, as we have, that there is a need, if you are showing that your spending is controlled, then the only thing that a fixed term levy does is say the same thing that a continuing does right now, and it says, and we're going to need to have that fixed term again in the future, and if things remain the way they are, we're going to need additional. So it's not that a fixed term, that, to me, the only thing that a fixed term does is say, okay, in 3 years, we don't have to pay you this money anymore, or in 4 years, we don't have to pay this money anymore. So it's not getting, I don't think, what the taxpayers are hoping that a fixed term would do. It's not fixing the need of the district. We have a need to move on, and I see our treasurer has something he needs to tell us. He has 3 minutes.
I can do it in 3 minutes. The difference, because I know the treasurer that was there before at Franklin very intimately. And a district that's at the 20 mil floor had used something called an emergency levy, which became a substitute levy. Loveland would love to be able to do that, but it would take 15, 20 years to even think about getting there. So
Why is that desirable?
because at the 20 mil floor, thank you. What a great question, Kevin. At the 20 mil floor, you get the full impact of the inflationary increase, and House Bill 920 doesn't exist. So when our property taxes increase, we also get the revenue that comes along with it. Franklin hit the floor while I was there because we moved the last little bit of millage out, but the board had the vision to use emergency levies and then create substitute levies from that, which was new legislation. And when they did that, it was only 5 years. And so that was a 5-year solution. Now I believe they're continuing, and I think they just didn't sell it, but it was a no new taxes kind of concept. But the 20 mil floor gives you the ability to have it gives you an inflationary based revenue stream. And so if you have that inflationary based revenue stream, then all of what we're talking about tonight doesn't even exist, because we're able to maintain a revenue stream that's consistent with what our expenditure needs are.
And you and I talked about this before. Loveland is at 34. A district that's at 20 captures inflation. We don't capture inflation on anything. We get inflation on zero.
And I asked the question about why can't the state of Ohio give us the 20 mil floor inflationary based revenue? And what I was told was that it would take a constitutional amendment, which means it needs to go to the voters of the entire state of Ohio. But I think that is certainly a fair ask of the state of Ohio, is just give us the 20 mil floor inflationary based revenue stream. It seems like nonsensical, but it is what it is. So at any rate, thank you for listening. 3 minutes is up.
Anything else?
I was going to say, yeah, so for us, for a renewable levy, it's renewed at the same reduced millage, right? I mean, it's the original millage. It's not, there's no advantage to doing the renewal in terms of at that 5 year, okay, now we're resetting the 5 mils.
So a renewal would be something that would take place as a result of an existing limited term levy. A replacement would put it back to the original millage. With continuing, that is an option. We could go back to a levy from 1976 that's now collecting about 15% of what it originally was, but it's the same thing as asking for a new levy. But
It's the same effect. to
same
the
effect.
taxpayers.
Yes, yes.
If I just clarify one thing, and then I'll be done. The reason Rob and I used 4.2, 4.9, and 6.5, it was purposeful. The 4.2 was when you eliminate the busing, which was 0.5, and the FTEs, which was 0.2, that's 0.7. So the thought was 4.9 minus 0.7 is 4.2. What's that look like? With the hopes that you got out of deficit spending when it was placed into the state model. Well, unfortunately, that didn't work. The state software then putting in the forecast put 4.9 as the least amount for the least number of years. The 6.5 was the optimal amount so that you could get the most years. And so that's how we came up with those three values. All three of those values, I think when you look, you're looking at maintaining. This is not augmenting anything. It's maybe reallocating some things. And so when I hear fixed term, the rationale I heard was we want to make sure that you're accountable for what you're doing. And I get that. That's true. And I may be sitting here today and not tomorrow, and we need to have some checks and balances. Hopefully not, yeah. But you have to have some checks and balances. The point I'm making is a 4.9 or a 6.5 does not allow us to augment. It allows us to maintain. And whether it's 3, 4, or 5 years, the voters, if they believe it was not managed well at the end of the 3 or 4 or 5 years, now it's another tough discussion when you need additional revenue. And so I get the argument for a fixed. If it were something where we were looking to augment and ask for more money than necessary to maintain, but right now this is just to maintain. And the last thing I will say to Kevin's point, I think any superintendent would welcome any income tax or earned income tax because it does have an inflationary growth built into the model. It's been proven very difficult to get them passed.
The only reason my eyes widened when you said sitting here today and not tomorrow is I thought you were talking about the meeting going till midnight.
Oh.
You know, I just.
Gave me a little shiver.
One other, one other quick point. We do have, we talked about the other pieces, the bond issue. Those do have an endpoint, and we've got a bond that is expiring this year, right? So when this, now we had that situation where you would have had the double for a year and then it would have gone down. But now when this would actually come into effect, we will have removed 1 mil of a bond. Correct?
You would have thought that I prepped this board for that particular point, but I appreciate that very much. And yes, the bond issue that was issued in 1998, $32 million, if I recall.
Who did that?
Excuse me?
Who did that?
Some young guy who was only like 38 years old at the time. And so that debt will be defeased, and there will be in 2024 only a quarter of a mil collecting that debt. But yes, that is why.
And then to zero after that, right?
Right, and that's why Kevin realized in his tax bill that it had gone down for the school district because it's gone down 3 mils since the last, I think the one you said you had was from 2019 or something like that. It had
I
gone.
think the oldest one I had in hand was 17, I think.
So it had gone down 3 mils since 17, certainly. And so there's just a quarter of a mil left to pay off just a fraction of the debt. But yes, and so the taxpayers in Loveland have realized a 3 mil decline in their tax bill since then.
So
Yes.
from a taxpayer's perspective, a 4.9 will feel like a 3.9
Yes.
because that other thing is gone.
Yes, you said it. I did not.
Okay,
Just
so
trying to help you.
unless there is more discussion, where we are in the agenda is that there are 3 proposed resolutions. What those resolutions would do if they are voted on and passed would allow the treasurer to submit a request to certify that those amounts, those millages, collect the amounts that we're talking about. Then there is an additional meeting set for January 31st, where the resolution would be to ask for one of those millages to be an issue placed on the ballot in May. So that's what the board is talking about, just so we're clear where we are.
So just one comment before we get into the discussion. I, for one, have spent all my energies on what we've talked about so far. I have no opinion tonight about one millage amount versus another. And my recommendation to everybody would be save that decision until the 31st, which one of the 3 we ultimately would settle on.
Yeah, so the idea is to approve all 3 of these so we can continue the conversation, the evaluation, make that decision. later time instead of, and
You'd have to
there
do
is
it
a
by the
deadline for
31st.
that.
You'd have to do it on the 31st.
Did you see my eyes widen when you said to start the discussion?
Yeah.
I was trying to make the point that there were things here that would need to be discussed January 31st. Is that what your point was?
All I'm saying is.
I think we
have
can do
three
that. We
potentially
can do that
different-
tonight.
You're saying don't make a decision tonight.
No, I understand.
Between the
I'm just,
three.
he
between
said
the
to
three.
start the discussion, and that was what I was
I would also advocate
thinking
that,
we had done.
Okay.
You would
Yes, we have
advocate.
we have started the discussion.
I would also advocate that if one of these do not do what needs to be done as just it coming forward, the board doesn't need to ask me to certify it with the county auditor.
You mean of the three?
Yes.
Yeah, well, for one, I have no opinion about one versus the other tonight.
Okay.
All right, well, we can see how it goes. If
Andiamo.
it's ready to proceed, then the first thing that would happen would be a motion to authorize a resolution of necessity to request certification for a 4.2 mil levy.
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Swetchnow moved, Mrs. Washburn seconded. Any discussion or questions about what that resolution is? We vote on that.
And Dr. Swetchnow?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
No.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes. Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
And Dr. Lorenz?
Yes. The next resolution is, oh, and I forgot to mention for the audience information, the full language of these resolutions is available on board docs. Perhaps the board would like me to read that full language, but I didn't think they did, so. The next resolution.
We did review it ahead of time.
Yes, but no, I mean, read it out loud because I like to hear the sound of my voice. The second resolution is that the board authorizes a resolution of necessity to request the certification of a 4.9 mil levy.
So moved.
Second.
I think Eileen and I got this.
Okay, so it sounds like they're choosing that Dr. Swetchnow moved and Mrs. Washburn seconded for this particular 4.9 certification. Questions or discussion? Mr. Giuffre?
Dr. Swetchnow?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
And Dr. Lorenz?
Yes, motion carries. The third resolution, and I believe final resolution on our agenda this evening,
So it's closing.
is an authorization for a resolution of necessity for a certification for a 6.5 mil levy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. You do have it down. So Dr. Swetchnow and Mrs. Washburn.
I'd rather everybody just has one person to blame.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, we're glad about that. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Giuffre?
Dr. Swetchnow?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
And Dr. Lorenz?
Yes, motion carries. Often I ask, is there any other business to come before this board? But I think what I'll ask right now is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Oh, there wasn't anybody opposed, right? Mr. Doherty, were you?
Oh, I
Nine.
want to stay here.
Yeah,
Talk
okay.
some more.
So then the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned.